Welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure. Harry died protecting Hermione and woke in 1943 to stop Tom Riddle before he became Voldemort. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, Death in 1943. The green light came for Hermione and Harry was already moving. He had a half second. He spent it the way he spent everything now, fast, without flinching. There was no calculation in it that felt like calculation. The math had been done years ago, in a cupboard, in a graveyard, in a forest where he had walked to his own death once and learned it could be done. Hermione was on one knee with her wand arm wrecked and Bellatrix's curse leaving the wand like a thrown star, and the only variable left in the equation was the distance between that light and Harry's body, and he closed it. The killing curse hit him in the chest. He had been struck by it before. He knew what it was supposed to feel like, which was nothing, a door slammed in a house with all the lights off. This was not that. This time something in him was already there to meet it, a guest that had lived behind his ribs since he was a year old and that he had thought foolishly was gone. The curse went looking for the soul to sever and found two, tangled, and it could not tell them apart. The world came apart along its seams. Harry saw the great hall fold like paper. He saw the stone of the floor open into geometry it had been hiding all along, not cracks but angles, a lattice of light running away from him in every direction at once, as if the castle had only ever been the surface of something enormous and folded. He saw the green of the curse stop being a color and become a direction. He fell along it. He understood in the last clear instant before he stopped being a body, that he was not dying so much as being read, pulled thread by thread out of one place and spooled toward another, toward the origin of the thing inside him, toward the wound the soul behind his ribs had first been torn from. He had time for one thought and he made it count. Hermione lives, everything after this is mine to spend. Then the lattice closed over him like water over stone and Harry Potter went out. He woke to the smell of carbolic soap and the particular silence of a room built to be quiet. He did not open his eyes. That was the first discipline older than the war: assess before you announce yourself. He lay still and let the information come. A mattress thinner than the ones at Hogwarts, sheets starched stiff, a high ceiling by the way sound moved, daylight gray on the inside of his eyelids. No spell hum, no wards he recognized pressing on his skin. His chest did not hurt. His chest, in fact, felt clearer than it had in a year, lighter, as though a weight he had stopped noticing had been lifted while he slept. That was the detail that made him open his eyes. He was in the hospital wing. He knew it before he knew anything else, knew the vault of the ceiling and the long row of beds and the tall windows, because he had bled in this room a dozen times and watched friends bleed in it more. But it was wrong. The beds had iron frames painted a green that had gone out of fashion before he was born. The cabinet of potions against the wall held bottles with hand-inked labels in a copperplate hand. There was a wireless on the matron's desk, wooden domed with a cloth speaker, and beside it a folded newspaper. Harry sat up, no dizziness, no wand at his hip, which he registered and set aside to deal with in order. He swung his legs out of the bed, and the floor was cold under his bare feet, and he crossed to the desk and picked up the paper and read the date at the top, and the room went very still around him. The Daily Prophet, Tuesday, the 14th of September, 1943. He read it twice. He turned the page to confirm the year appeared again. It did. There was a column about rationing of self-stirring cauldrons for the duration, a notice about the Muggle blackout regulations and how they were to be observed by wizarding households in mixed districts, a photograph of a man in dress robes shaking hands with a goblin over some treaty Harry had never heard of. 48 years before he was born, 3 before the man who would become his father's father had even left school, probably. Harry put the paper down with a steadiness that was its own kind of decision. Grief was there. He felt it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder in the dark, present, heavy, certain. Ron Ginny, the hall full of the dead and the not yet dead. The fact that he had thrown himself into a curse and the curse had taken him somewhere instead of nowhere, and that somewhere was here, decades upstream of every grave he had ever stood beside. He let himself feel it for the length of one breath. Then he folded it the way you fold a map you will need again later and put it away, because there was a newspaper on the desk that said 1943 and a name that went with that year, and the name was the only thing in the world that mattered now. Tom Riddle was alive. Tom Riddle was 16 years old. Tom Riddle was almost certainly somewhere in this castle at this moment, walking a corridor or sitting in a class or smiling at a professor with that smile Harry had seen in a stone basin, the one that never reached the eyes. And Voldemort did not exist yet. There was no Dark Lord, no Death Eaters with a name, no Horcruxes, or only the beginning of them if he had the year right, and Harry was almost certain he had the year right. He had spent a year of his life chasing the broken pieces of a soul across Britain. He knew the shape of this man's evil better than anyone living, better than the man himself did yet. He had been given the one thing no one in any war is ever given. He had been put at the start. "You're awake," Harry turned. He did not startle. He had heard the door, had clocked the footsteps, and chosen not to react until he had read the paper, because the paper would not wait and a person would. The witch in the doorway wore the high-collared dress of a matron from another century, which was simply the current century here, and she carried a tray and frowned at him with the professional disapproval of someone whose patient was out of bed. "Back in," she said. "You took a knock to the head that should have kept a troll down. We found you on the road below Hogsmeade with no shoes and no name. Professor Dumbledore carried you up himself." Harry's pulse did something it had not done since he was 11 years old, hearing a name for the first time. He kept his face still. "Dumbledore," he said, as if testing the word, which in a way he was. "Professor Dumbledore, Transfiguration." She said it the way you'd name a fixture, a man who taught a subject, not the most dangerous wizard alive. "He's asked to see you the moment you can stand without falling over, which is not yet." She set the tray on the bedside table, bread, a wedge of hard cheese, a tin cup of something that steamed. "Sit, eat. You'll tell me your name when your wits come back, and I'll tell you you've nothing to fear in this castle, which is true." It is not true, Harry thought, and you don't know the half of why. He sat because sitting bought him time, and time was the only currency he had right now, and he ate the bread because a body that has just been struck by a killing curse and thrown half a century is a body that needs fuel, and he had learned in a tent in a forest that you eat when you can, whether you want to or not. While he ate, he ran the inventory, the cold, clean list he had been building since he opened his eyes. His body was his own, his real body, 16 or 17 by the feel of it, younger than the war had left him, the old scar on the back of his hand gone, the lightning scar. He reached up and touched his forehead and found it smooth. Gone. The thing that had made that scar had been the fragment behind his ribs, and the curse had taken the fragment, and the curse had brought him here, following that fragment's bond all the way back to its source. He understood the mechanism now, sitting in a 1943 bed with cheese in his hand, and it was elegant and terrible. The piece of Voldemort's soul that had ridden in him had been struck loose, and instead of dying it had been spooled home to the year and the place where it had first been made, and Harry, fused to it, host to it, twin to it, had been carried along. He had been delivered to the wound. To the exact moment the soul-tearing began. No wand. That was a real problem, and he gave it real weight. His holly wand was, he did not know where his holly wand was, whether it had come through with him or stayed in the future or been ash on the floor of a hall that would not be built for 50 years. He would have to find out, and he would have to find a wand he could use in the meantime, and he would have to do it without anyone learning that a boy found unconscious on a road could cast like a man who had fought a war. No name they would accept. Harry Potter was the name of a child who would not be born for 45 years, the grandson of people who were children now. He could not be Potter. The Potters were an old family. There would be a genealogy and interest, questions he could not survive. He needed a name with no thread to pull. He needed a story that could not be checked, or that checked out just far enough and then dissolved into a fog the way real foreign records did in 1943, when An Owl to America took 3 weeks and half the relevant offices had been requisitioned for the war. He needed, in short, to be a transfer student from very far away, with papers in transit, an orphan with no living family to write to, and a manner that discouraged anyone from looking too hard. He had been an orphan with no living family his whole first life. He could do the manner in his sleep. "Black," he said. The matron looked up. "What's that?" "My name." He met her eyes. He had decided on it between one bite and the next, the way he decided most things now, fast, then committed. Black was a real wizarding family, old and large and tangled enough that an unknown cousin out of an American branch would raise an eyebrow and no alarm. It was also privately a name he could carry without flinching, because the last man he had known who wore it had loved him, and Harry was about to spend a long time in a place where no one would. Harry Black. Well, Mr. Black. She seemed satisfied to have a label for him. "Eat, the professor will be along." Albus Dumbledore at 60-some was a different animal than the silver-bearded headmaster of Harry's memory, and Harry had perhaps 4 seconds to absorb the difference before the man's eyes found his, because the difference was concentrated almost entirely in the eyes. The beard was auburn shot with gray, not white. The robes were a deep plum, well cut, vain in the small way Harry had forgotten Dumbledore had once been vain. He moved like a man who still expected his body to do what he asked. But the eyes were the same, that blue, terribly kind and terribly attentive, the eyes of someone who had already counted the exits and was choosing to stay anyway, and they came to rest on Harry across the hospital wing, and Harry felt himself read. This was the danger. He had known it would be, had been building for it since the word Dumbledore left the matron's mouth. Of everyone alive in 1943, this was the one mind that could unmake his cover by looking at it, the one man who might suspect the truth simply because the truth, however impossible, was the sort of thing Albus Dumbledore turned out to be right about. Harry could not afford to be interesting to this man. He also could not afford to be boring, because Dumbledore had carried him up the hill personally, which meant he was already interested, which meant the only winning move was to be interesting in exactly one carefully chosen way and uninteresting in every other. "Mr. Black," Dumbledore said, and drew up a chair without being asked, and sat and folded his long hands. I am told that is the name you have decided to use, not your name. 4 words, and the man had already flagged that he found the name a choice rather than a fact. Harry registered it and let it sharpen him. It's the name I have, Harry said, a careful answer. Dumbledore smiled, and the smile was warm and the eyes did not leave Harry's face. Forgive an old teacher his curiosity. You were found below Hogsmeade with no coat in September, no wand we could locate, and the distinct look of a young man who has been somewhere extremely unpleasant. Madame Prout believes you to be a runaway. I am not yet decided. May I ask where you have come from? Here was the cliff. Harry had spent the meal building the bridge, and now he walked it without looking down. Across the Atlantic, he said. I was schooled in America. There was a disagreement in my family after my parents died. I left. I had a way to make the crossing, and I used it, and it put me down harder than it should have in the dark on a road I didn't know. I was making for Hogwarts because it was the only name I knew on this side of the water that meant safe. He let a beat of the truth bleed through because the best lies are mostly true, and he had decided which true thing to spend. I haven't got anyone. There's no one to write to. I'd rather not be sent back. It was good. He knew it was good. It accounted for the wandlessness, the disorientation, the foreign manner. It gave Dumbledore a reason to keep him that flattered the man's better instincts. It closed every door that led to a record. And almost all of it was true. He was an orphan. There was no one to write to. There was no one in this entire century who knew his face. He had crossed an impossible distance and been put down hard in the dark. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Blue eyes moved over Harry's face, and Harry let them, holding the older man's gaze the way you hold a hand of cards you are confident in, neither too long nor too short. You say your parents are dead, Dumbledore said gently. I'm sorry, that is a wound I know the shape of. A flicker there and gone. Harry, who had read the man's whole life eventually, knew exactly which graves that flicker came from and said nothing. And you have no documents. In transit, Harry said, or lost. I came in a hurry. Dumbledore tilted his head. Here is my difficulty, Mr. Black. I have taught a great many young people, and I have learned to tell the runaways from the others. A runaway is frightened of the thing behind him. You are not frightened of anything behind you. The eyes sharpened, kind and merciless. You are watching the room. You looked at the door when I came in, and at my hands, and at the window. You ate as though you did not know when you would eat again. You have the manner of a soldier and the face of a boy, and I find I cannot reconcile the two, and I am too old and too curious to pretend I haven't noticed. There it was. Harry had perhaps 3 seconds to decide how much rope to give. He had thought about this over the meal, what to do when Dumbledore inevitably saw too much. He had 2 options. He could double down on the harmless orphan and be caught in the gap between the story and the soldier, and lose Dumbledore's trust forever the first time the man tested him. Or he could give the great Legilimens one true and unfalsifiable thing, a thing Dumbledore could not check and could not disprove and would have to simply weigh and let that one truth carry the weight the lie could not. He chose the second. It was the more dangerous move and the better one. You're right, Harry said quietly. I've seen him. Dumbledore went still. I won't tell you which one or where because you wouldn't believe me, and the part of it you would believe would put you in danger you don't need. Harry held the blue gaze and did not blink. I lost everyone. I came here because there is something in this school that I am the only person alive who knows how to stop, and I am going to stop it, and I would very much rather do it as a quiet student in your house than as a problem in your office. You can send me back to a country that has nothing for me, or you can let me sit in your classroom and find out over time whether I'm worth the risk. Those are the moves on the board, Professor. I'd take the second one, but it's yours to make. The silence after that was long, and it was the first thing Harry had said since waking that he had not entirely controlled, because the last sentences had come out with more of the war in them than he meant, and he watched Dumbledore hear it. The old wizard did not reach for his mind. Harry had braced for the touch of legilimency, and it did not come, and that absence told him something, that Dumbledore had decided the contents of Harry's head were less informative than the way Harry was choosing to guard them, which was exactly the conclusion Harry himself would have drawn. 2 careful minds had just recognized each other across a hospital bed, and both had elected restraint, and that mutual restraint was the actual beginning of whatever this was going to be. I have made a career, Dumbledore said at last slowly, of being wrong about gifted and damaged young men in the most expensive possible direction. Again that flicker, and again Harry knew its source and held his tongue. I have promised myself I would learn from it. And here is a gifted and damaged young man telling me to my face that he is dangerous and asking me to keep him anyway. A breath. Most people lie to get into Hogwarts, Mr. Black. You have told me a frightening truth to the same end. I confess I find that harder to refuse. Is that a yes? It is a we shall see, which from a teacher is a great deal closer to yes than no. Dumbledore rose, unfolding to his full considerable height, and for an instant the room rearranged itself around him the way rooms did around powerful men, and Harry was reminded, with a small, clean shock of memory, exactly who this was going to become. You will be examined for your year. You will be sorted since you have not been, which headmaster Dippet will find irregular and I will find interesting. And you will tell me in time what it is in my school that you have come to stop. The eyes warmed. Not today, you are still standing on the strength of bread and stubbornness, but in time, Harry Black, I am a patient man, and you are a poor liar in exactly the way that makes me want to trust you. He went to the door and paused and looked back and asked the question Harry had known was coming since the man sat down, the one real test of the whole conversation. Out of curiosity, Dumbledore said lightly. When you say there's something in this school you mean to stop, is it a thing or is it a person? And Harry, who had crossed half a century and given up a soul shard and a scar and a whole life to be asked exactly this question by exactly this man, looked Albus Dumbledore in the eye and made his first real move of the war he had come back to fight. That, he said, is what I came to find out. Dumbledore studied him a moment longer. Then he inclined his head the smallest fraction, the way one strategist acknowledges another's opening, and left. Dumbledore returned once more that same afternoon before the light failed, and he came carrying a wand. A wizard without a wand is a tragedy the school is obliged to prevent, he said, and laid it on the blanket across Harry's knees, pale wood, plainly old, a faint patina of other hands worn into the grip. You and unicorn hair, 11 inches. The unclaimed property of a student who left us a very long time ago and never came back for it. It is yours until your own is found, if it ever is. Try it. A wand will tell you in a heartbeat whether it intends to cooperate. Harry took it up and knew at once that it did not. It was not hostile. It was simply indifferent, the way a borrowed coat is indifferent, fitting nowhere and warming nothing, and when he turned it in his fingers the magic in it lay quiet and unfamiliar, a stranger's rhythm against his own. He lit the tip of it, the smallest charm there was, and the light came a fraction late and a shade too cold, and he understood that every spell he cast through this thing for as long as he carried it was going to arrive slightly wrong, like a sentence spoken in an accent not his own. He had cast through reluctant wood before in the worst months of the war, and he had learned the trick of it, which was to stop asking and start insisting. But it would cost him, every time, a small constant tax of effort that no one watching was meant to see. It doesn't love you, Dumbledore observed, watching the cold light. Few borrowed wands do. And yet you made it light on the first attempt, without the flicker most people get from a strange wand, which tells me you have done this before, made an unwilling wand obey you because the situation did not permit it to refuse. The blue eyes lifted. That is not a skill one learns in a comfortable life, Mr. Black. No, Harry agreed and let the light go out, and the room seemed darker for a moment than the hour warranted. It isn't. He did not explain, and Dumbledore did not ask, and the two of them sat for a moment in the understanding that had been building between them since the first conversation, that Harry was a person to whom hard things had happened, who had survived them by becoming someone who could insist, and that the survival had left marks a careful man could read. Then Dumbledore rose and told him the headmaster would see him after noon, and left him alone with a wand that would never be his and a great many spells he would have to relearn how to throttle. Harry practiced for an hour after the door closed, quietly under the blanket, the smallest workings he could manage, a feather lifted, a thread of water drawn from the air and let fall, a shape conjured and unmade. Each one came a half-degree off, and each one he corrected by main force, and by the end of the hour he had the measure of the thing. It would do whatever he made it do, and it would make him pay a little for the making, and the price was one he could afford as long as no one ever saw him counting it out. He set the wand in his sleeve where his real one used to ride and lay back and thought that there was something almost fitting in it, that he had come to this century stripped of the wand that loved him, to do a job that no one would ever know was done, and that he would do it through borrowed wood, insisting, paying the quiet tax, asking nothing back. It was, more or less, the shape of the whole task. He might as well get used to the feel of it in his hand. The hospital wing at night was a long room of moonlight and iron, and Harry lay awake in it and let himself think the whole thing through to the bottom, because a plan made in daylight is a wish, and a plan made in the dark is a plan. He started with the mechanism, because if he understood how he had come here, he could rule out the ways he might be sent back, or lose what he knew, or wake to find this had been the last firing of a dying mind. He did not think it was that. The room was too consistent, the cold of the floor too particular, Dumbledore's auburn beard too specific a detail for a dream to invent. He believed he was here. So how? He turned it in the dark the way he had once turned the riddle of the Horcruxes, and the shape came clear, vast and strange, the way that magic always came clear to him at the end, not as words but as a geometry. Voldemort had made a piece of himself live in Harry on the night his parents died, a splinter of soul, lodged behind the scar, riding in him for 17 years. When the killing curse struck Harry in the hall, it had gone hunting for a soul to sunder and found that splinter first, the unanchored one, and a thing torn from a hole does not simply vanish. It seeks its origin the way water seeks the sea. The splinter had been pulled back along the bond toward the place in the moment it had first been made. The first wound in Tom Riddle's soul, the first tearing in Harry fused to it, host and twin, had been reeled in behind it like a fish on a line that had decided to swim home. He had been delivered to the year of the first cut, not by accident, by the logic of soul magic itself, which always returned to the scene of its own crime. That was the cosmic joke of it, and Harry, lying in the iron bed, almost laughed. The very thing that made Voldemort unkillable, the splitting, the anchoring, the refusal to let any piece of himself rest, was the thing that had reached back through 50 years and set his executioner down at the source. The Dark Lord had built a door he never knew was a door, and Harry had been posted through it, which meant the date mattered enormously, and he made himself certain of it. September of 1943. He had not learned the history of Tom Riddle from records. He had learned it from a man who walked his own memories like rooms, who had shown him the orphanage and the gaunt shack and the moment a young prefect opened a hidden chamber and let something old and blind out into the pipes of a school. The Chamber of Secrets had been opened in Riddle's 5th or 6th year. A girl had died in a bathroom. And that death, Harry knew this the way he knew his own name, had been the first murder Tom Riddle used to tear his soul, the death that turned a diary into the first Horcrux. It had not happened yet. He was almost sure it had not happened yet. The air of the castle was uneasy but not yet grieving. Hagrid was here and not yet expelled, which meant the monster had not yet been blamed, which meant the death had not yet come. He had arrived in the narrow window between the loading of the gun and the pulling of the trigger. He had weeks, maybe less. He set that at the top of the board and built everything else beneath it. The second problem was the wand, and he gave it real weight even now that the borrowed yew lay in his sleeve. His holly wand was gone, not here, not on him, not anywhere he could reach. He had felt for it the moment he woke and felt its absence like a missing tooth. He did not mourn it. But the yew Dumbledore had pressed on him that afternoon would never love him and never quite obey, and a wand that fought its wizard in a castle that contained the most dangerous boy in Britain was barely better than no wand at all, a condition he intended to mend as fast as the world allowed. He would have to learn the borrowed wood's temper and hide how far past that temper he could push. He had cast through reluctant wands before. He had snapped his own once and limped along on a borrowed substitute through the worst months of the war, and he had learned that a wand's reluctance could be overruled by a wizard who had stopped caring whether the magic liked him. He cared less than ever now. That would have to be enough until he could do better. He thought last about the rule. He had said it at breakfast, and he tested it now in the honest dark, the way you test a rope before you trust your weight to it. Do not kill the boy on foreknowledge alone. It would be so easy. He could end the entire war tonight in theory, find the Slytherin dormitory, do the thing and walk out, and 1,000 graves would simply never be dug. Part of him, the part that had stood on the edge of too many of those graves, wanted it with an appetite that frightened him a little. But he had learned something in his first life that the hungry part of him kept trying to forget. He had learned that he was not, in the end, a murderer of sleeping boys, and that the day he became one he would have handed Voldemort the only victory that mattered, the remaking of a decent person into something that killed because it was efficient. Harry had walked into a forest once and let himself be killed rather than become that. He was not going to undo it here over an enemy he had not yet so much as spoken to, and there was the colder reason, the tactical one, the one he could say to himself without flinching. He did not yet know. He knew what Tom Riddle became. He did not know whether the boy at the Slytherin table was already past saving or still standing at the fork, whether the soul had already been torn in some smaller cruelty he had no record of, or whether it was still, tonight, whole and savable and merely waiting for the death in the bathroom to do the cutting. If it was the first, then killing him was justice and arithmetic, and Harry would do it without losing sleep. If it was the second, if there was still a whole soul in that cold, watchful boy, then there might be a way to win this war that did not require a single death, and Harry had buried too many people to throw away even the slimmest chance of a war that nobody had to die in, so he would test it, coldly, deliberately, the way you test a bridge before you march an army across it. He would get close enough to read the boy himself rather than through a dead man's memories. He would find out whether the splitting had already begun, and he would let the answer, not his rage, not his grief, not the hunger for the clean kill, decide what came next. It was, he understood, the most dangerous thing he could possibly do. To get close to Tom Riddle was to put his face within reach of the most accomplished reader of people the wizarding world would ever produce, a boy who collected the weaknesses of everyone around him the way other boys collected sweets. One slip, one wrong word, one flash of knowledge he could not account for, and Riddle would know there was something hidden in the new boy, and a Tom Riddle who knew there was a secret would not rest until he had it, and the secret Harry carried was the future itself. He lay in the moonlight and the iron and accepted the danger the way he accepted everything now, fully and without drama. Then he closed his eyes, and for the first time since the green light, he let the grief out all the way. Ron, Ginny, the hall, Hermione's wrecked arm and her face in the half-second before he had stepped in front of the light, and he let it run through him and out, spent rather than folded, because a man cannot carry a war on a grief he has refused to feel. When it had passed, he was empty and clean and very calm, the way he had been on the walk into the forest, and in that calm he slept. They let him up the next morning. Madame Prout produced a set of school robes a size too large and a pair of second-hand shoes, and told him the headmaster would see him after the noon meal, and that until then he was to stay out from underfoot, which Harry took as license to do the one thing he most needed to do, which was to walk the castle and relearn it as it was now. It was Hogwarts, and it was not. The bones were the same, the moving stairs, the long galleries, the suits of armor that watched you pass, but the skin was wrong in 100 small ways that kept catching him. Gas lamps where he expected torches, a tapestry hole that he had only ever known in tatters, a corridor on the 4th floor that in his own time had been sealed for 60 years, and that here stood open and busy with students. The students wore their hair and their robes in the styles of old newsreels. They spoke with the clipped vowels of the wireless. A boy went past him carrying a broom that looked, to Harry's eye, like a museum piece and to its owner like the latest thing. And they were all so young and so unhaunted, and they did not know. That was the thing that nearly undid his composure, not the strangeness but the innocence. None of them knew. Not one of these laughing, ordinary children knew that within their own lifetimes a man would rise who would hunt their kind of ordinary life to extinction, that some of them were a decade from a war that would put their names on a memorial wall, that the worst of it was already here, 16 years old, sitting in exam 2 corridors over. They walked through their own future like people crossing a frozen river in spring, and only Harry could hear the ice. He let himself feel that once fully, standing at a window that looked out on the lake. Then he folded it and put it away because he had a job, and self-pity was a luxury for men who had not been handed the start of the story. He found the great hall by the noise of it. The doors stood open on the long tables and the enchanted ceiling, which today showed a flat gray drizzle, and the hall was half full with the tale of the morning meal, and Harry stopped in the doorway because he had learned to read a room before he entered it, and there was something in this one to read. It was a boy at the Slytherin table. Harry's eyes found him without being told where to look, the way your eyes find the one face in a crowd that is already turned toward you, except this boy was not looking at Harry. He sat at the center of a loose half-circle of older students, and he was the center the way the sun is the center, without trying, by the simple geometry of how everyone else had arranged themselves around him. He was dark-haired and clean-featured and entirely composed, a prefect's badge bright on his chest, and he was listening to something one of the others said with an attention so complete and so flattering that the speaker leaned in to deserve it. He was handsome in the way of a knife laid on velvet. And when he laughed at whatever was said, the laugh was perfect and warm and arrived a half-second after his eyes had already decided to produce it. The temperature of the room seemed to drop a degree. It did not, of course. The ceiling drizzled on. But Harry stood in the doorway and felt the cold come off that one composed figure like a draft from an open cellar, and he knew, before anyone named the boy, exactly who he was looking at. He had seen this face before, younger, in a diary that bled memory, and older, ruined, with a flat nose and red eyes, leaning over him in a graveyard. Between those two faces had been a war, and here in the middle, untouched, was the hinge of it all, 16 years old, laughing on cue at the Slytherin table on a gray Tuesday in 1943. Tom Riddle. As if he had heard his own name in Harry's mind, the boy looked up. It was nothing. A glance toward the door, the ordinary glance of someone registering that a stranger had entered, the new boy everyone was already whispering about. Their eyes met across the length of the hall for perhaps a second and a half. Riddle's expression did not change. There was no flash of recognition because there could be none. Harry was a stranger, a foreign transfer, a boy in oversized robes. The look held the polite, faint, cataloging curiosity of a clever person filing a new fact. And Harry, who had crossed 50 years and a dozen graves for this exact moment, looked back into the eyes of the boy who would become the murderer of everyone he loved, and felt the whole architecture of his grief and his rage and his mission settle into a single still point behind his sternum, cold and clear and absolutely certain. He did not glare, he did not show a thing. He had learned in a forest that the most dangerous face is the calm one. He let Tom Riddle see a polite, faintly tired stranger who looked back without interest and then turned away to find a seat at the far Gryffindor end, as any new boy would. But in the second and a half that the look held, Harry made the only promise that had ever mattered to him as much as the one he had made to Hermione in the half-instant before the green light took him. I know what you are, I know what you'll do. I know the name you'll take and the things you'll tear and the people you'll bury, and I'm the only one who does, and I am sitting down to breakfast in your school. One of us rewrites the rest of it, and it isn't going to be you. He sat, he ate. Down the hall, Tom Riddle returned his perfect attention to his admirers, and the gray light came down through the enchanted ceiling on the both of them, the boy who would be Voldemort and the man who had already beaten him once, 50 years and a lifetime away, sharing a roof for the first time. Harry set himself one rule then over the cooling porridge, because a man without a rule in a place like this becomes the thing he came to stop. He would not kill the boy out of foreknowledge alone, not yet. Not while there was a chance the cost of mercy was lower than the cost of murder, and not until he had tested, coldly and for himself, whether what sat at the Slytherin table was a monster already made or a monster still being built. If it was the second, there might be another way. If it was the first, he would do what no one in his own time had managed to do in time, and he would do it here at the source before the name Voldemort was ever spoken aloud in the world. Either way, the war he had died in had just gotten its first chance to never happen. And Harry Black, formerly Potter, the boy who lived twice now and counting, picked up his spoon and began, quietly and without hurry, to plan. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. A student beside Tom Riddle. The sorting happened that evening in the headmaster's study, with an audience of 3. Headmaster Armando Dippet was a small, anxious wizard who clearly disliked irregularity, and a foreign boy with no papers being slotted into a school year already begun was about as irregular as his autumn was likely to get. He sat behind a desk too large for him and asked Harry the questions a worried administrator asks. What subjects had he taken? Could he keep the pace? Did he understand that Hogwarts could make no promises about a place he had not earned? And Harry answered each one in the flat, competent way that bored such men into letting you be. Dumbledore stood by the window, hands folded, saying nothing, watching Harry the way a man watches a card he has already decided to bet on. And on a shelf above them sat the sorting hat, ancient and patched and very awake. It is unusual, Dippet fretted, to sort a boy of 16. The hat is meant for first years. The hat is meant for whoever wears it, said Dumbledore mildly. Armando, the boy must belong to a house if he is to live in one. Let us not make a constitutional crisis of a frightened young man needing a bed. Dippet sighed and waved a hand, and Dumbledore took the hat from the shelf and brought it to Harry, and as he lowered it, the old wizard's eyes met Harry's for a heartbeat, interested, watchful, withholding judgment, and then the brim came down over Harry's brow and the world went dark and a voice spoke inside his skull. Well, said the hat, now this is something I have not had before. Harry sat very still and said nothing, out loud or in. You are older than you look, older than your bones. There is a whole life folded up in here, and a war, and oh, the hat's voice changed, lost its sorting day briskness. Oh, I see what you have come back to do, how very far you have come to do it. Then you know not to say it, Harry thought, as clearly and as coldly as he had ever thought anything. I have never betrayed a head I sat upon, and I will not begin with the strangest one I have ever met, the hat said, almost gently. But I will tell you what I see, because you ought to hear it from something that cannot lie to you. You are brave to the point of self-destruction, and you always have been. That is Gryffindor, plain as a struck bell, but there is more cunning in you now than the boy you were ever had. You have learned to plan, to wait, to wear a face. You could do your terrible task so much more easily from inside the green. The boy you have come to watch would gather you up gladly. You would be close. You would be trusted. You would have every door open. It was, Harry knew, exactly right. Slytherin was the tactically correct house. It put him at Riddle's table in Riddle's common room inside the orbit he had come to enter with a head start of weeks. Every cold part of him that had spent a year planning a war recognized the efficiency of it, and he refused it, and he knew why, and the why mattered more than the efficiency. No, he thought, no. If I put on the green to get close to him, I become a thing that gets close to people for what I can take from them. That's him. That's the whole of him. I'm not going to beat him by becoming a better version of him. Harry's jaw set under the brim. Put me where I belong. Let him come to me on my ground, or not at all. I'll do this as myself, or I won't do it. There was a silence inside the hat that felt oddly like respect. You understand that you are choosing the harder road purely to keep your own hands clean, the hat observed. I understand that the road that ends with clean hands is the only one worth walking twice, Harry thought. Sort me. Gryffindor, the hat cried aloud, and the word rang off the stone, and Dippet startled, and Dumbledore, Harry saw it in the half-second before the brim lifted, smiled. They gave him a bed in the sixth-year boys' dormitory that night, the one nearest the window, and Harry lay in it after the others had fallen asleep, and listened to a roomful of breathing that belonged to people who would all be dead before he was born, and did not let it move him, because he had a great deal of work to do, and grief was a tax he could not afford to pay every night. The dormitory was warm in a way the rest of the castle was not. 4 other boys shared it, and they had taken him in over the course of a single evening with the unguarded ease of a house that had never learned to be afraid. A lanky beater named Folly who talked in his sleep, a quiet half-Italian boy named Zabini who read by wandlight under his covers and pretended he didn't, the Pruett twins' older cousin whose name Harry kept losing. They had asked him the ordinary questions, the ones that cost nothing, and he had given the ordinary answers, and somewhere in the middle of it he had caught himself almost relaxing, almost being 16, and had pulled the relaxation back like a hand from a flame, because a man who let himself be 16 in this room would make mistakes a 16-year-old made, and Harry could not afford mistakes within reach of Tom Riddle. He took the U-wand out under the blanket and turned it in the dark, learning it. It still lay quiet and unfamiliar against his fingers, the borrowed rhythm refusing to become his own, and he worked it through the smallest exercises he knew. A mote of light kindled and killed, a feather lifted from the floor and lowered, a thread of warmth drawn into the cold sheets, and corrected each half-degree of wrongness by main force, paying the quiet tax until the wand had stopped surprising him even if it had not begun to love him. By the time he was done, the others were deep asleep, and the moon had moved a hand's width across the window, and Harry lay back and let himself, for one disciplined minute, take the measure of where he was. A child's body, a man's war behind his eyes, a wand that didn't want him, a name that wasn't his, a mission no one would ever know he'd undertaken, in a castle full of people he could not save by saving, and could only protect by changing the one boy who would otherwise unmake them all. It should have felt impossible. It had felt impossible in the iron bed of the hospital wing before he had a plan. It did not feel impossible now, and the reason it did not was the reason it never had, because he had done impossible things before more than once with less than this, and he had learned the single most important thing a soldier can learn, which was that the size of the task is irrelevant to the question of whether you begin it. You begin it, you take the first square. You make the first move and see what the board does, and then you make the next one, and that is the whole of how anything that ever got done got done. Tomorrow he would take the first square. He would walk down to the Gryffindor table and let the castle look at him and begin, move by move, the slow campaign to get close enough to Tom Riddle to read him to the bone. He turned on his side and watched the moon track the window, and Harry, who had imagined losing every night of the war and lost anyway and come back from it, closed his eyes and slept the light, ready sleep of a man who knew exactly how much there was to lose and had decided, regardless, to play. Word of a foreign transfer sorted in the headmaster's study traveled the castle faster than Harry could walk it, and by the time he came down to the Gryffindor table the next morning, he was already a known quantity in the specific, watchful way that new things are known. He let himself be looked at. He had decided his manner days ago, lying in the iron bed, pleasant, unhurried, a little remote, the manner of a boy who had been somewhere hard and did not intend to talk about it. It was not a performance, it was simply the truth with the dangerous parts left out. The Gryffindors of 1943 took him in with the easy generosity of the house that had never learned suspicion. A broad-shouldered fifth-year named Septimus Weasley shoved down the bench to make room with a grin so familiar that Harry had to look away for a moment. The same red hair, the same open face, the great something of a boy who would not be born for half a century. "Septimus," the boy said, sticking out a hand, "you're the American, you don't look American." "I move around," said Harry, and took the hand, and the warmth of it went into him further than he let show. "This is Caris," Septimus said, nodding at a sharp-eyed Slytherin girl who had wandered over from her own table with the territorial confidence of someone who went where she liked, a crouch Harry would learn, and the girl Septimus would one day marry, though neither of them seemed to have decided it yet. "She'll tell you everyone's business before the porridge is cold. Caris, the American." "Harry Black," said Caris, reading the name off him like a label. "There are English blacks, you know, Towger's Purr and all that. They'll want to know if you're theirs." "I'll be sure to disappoint them," Harry said, and Caris laughed, a short, surprised bark, and decided in that instant to like him, and that was 2 allies acquired before he had finished his first cup of tea. Warm, ordinary, decent people, the kind the war had taught him to value above almost anything. He filed the warmth away as a resource and meant to protect it. He spent the first week learning the shape of 1943, and he learned it the way he had learned to clear a building during the war, methodically, leaving nothing unchecked. The magic was the first surprise. He had braced for it to be cruder than his own time, and in some ways it was. The defensive spellwork he overheard in corridors was a generation behind, the dueling forms stiffer, the assumptions about what was possible narrower, but in other ways it was richer and older. There were spells in casual use here that had been lost or banned by his own day, bits of household magic and wardcraft that the modern ministry had legislated out of existence. He listened to everything and said little and let the place teach him. The second surprise was the borrowed wand, and it was a daily problem he had expected and underestimated. Dumbledore had arranged for him to have one in unicorn hair, 11 inches, the unclaimed property of some long-departed student, pressed into Harry's hand with the dry remark that a wizard without a wand is a tragedy the school is obliged to prevent. It worked. It simply did not work for him. Every spell came out a half-degree off, like writing with the wrong hand, the magic arriving a fraction late and a fraction sullen, and Harry had to throttle himself constantly, to cast at the level of a competent 6th year and no higher, to let his transfigurations be merely good, to keep the war out of his wandwork. He had spent years learning to put everything he had into every spell because the alternative was dying. Now he spent every lesson doing the opposite, holding the flood behind a 6th year's dam, and it was exhausting in a way that surprised him. He slipped once. He had known he would, eventually. The only question had been the cost. It happened in the courtyard on the 4th day, and it happened because a 2nd year named Edgar Bones, Harry knew the name, knew the family, knew what some of them would die for, was showing off a borrowed broom he could not control. The boy went up too fast and lost his nerve at 30 feet, and the broom bucked and threw him, and he came down headfirst toward the flagstones with the whole courtyard watching and no one near enough to do anything, and Harry did not decide to act. His body decided. The U-wand was in his hand, and the boy's fall simply stopped, 3 feet above the stone, the spell out of Harry before he had chosen the words, clean, soundless, perfectly controlled, the work of a wizard who had caught falling people under fire and had stopped finding it difficult. Edgar Bones hung in the air, white-faced, and Harry lowered him to the ground as gently as setting down a cup, and only then did he register the silence. The courtyard was staring at him. It had been too good. He knew at the instant it was done. The spell had been too fast, too quiet, too sure. The cushioning charm of someone who had done it 100 times in worse conditions than a sunny courtyard. A sixth-year transfer was not supposed to move like that. He had thrown a fortnight of careful mediocrity away in 2 seconds because a child had been about to crack his skull, and he did not, examining the thing honestly, regret it. He would do it again, but it was a cost, and he made himself count it. That, said a voice, was very well done. Harry turned, and Tom Riddle was leaning against the courtyard arch with his arms folded, watching him with an expression of polite, genuine, entirely undivided interest, and the temperature of the morning seemed to drop the degree it always dropped around him. He had not been there a moment ago. Harry was certain of it. He tracked rooms, tracked who stood where. It was reflex, and Riddle had not been in the courtyard when Edgar fell. He had arrived in the gap, drawn by the disturbance the way the cold is drawn to an open door, and he had seen the catch, and he had understood exactly what Harry had understood, that the spell was too good for the boy who had cast it. He was going to land on his head, Harry said. It didn't seem like the morning for it. No. Riddle pushed off the arch and came closer, unhurried, and the other students melted out of his path without seeming to notice they were doing it. Up close he was even more composed than he had looked across the hall. There was not a thread out of place on him, not a flicker of the showing off that the other handsome boys could not suppress, just that flat, attentive, beautiful stillness. I don't believe we've met properly. Tom Riddle, prefect for my sins, which means it falls to me to welcome the strays. The smile he produced was warm and perfectly judged and arrived again, a half-second after his eyes. And you are the American everyone is so busy inventing stories about, Harry Black. That's the name, Harry agreed. Is it? Riddle's head tilted a fraction. It was the smallest thing, a gesture of mild curiosity, and Harry, who had spent a year learning to read the smallest things, saw the question under it land like a stone dropped down a well. Is it your name? The same instinct Dumbledore had shown, the same flag on the same word, from the opposite end of the moral universe. 2 of the cleverest people in the castle had now looked at Harry Black and silently decided it was a costume. Harry let the realization arrive and gave it nothing on his face. It's the name I answer to, he said, which is the only part that matters in a corridor. Something moved behind Riddle's eyes, amusement possibly, or its careful imitation. A philosopher, we get so few. He glanced briefly at the U-wand still in Harry's hand, and the glance was a question too. Your wand. 11 inches you borrowed, Harry said. Mine didn't survive the crossing. A pity. A borrowed wand is a borrowed temper, and yet, Riddle nodded at the patch of air where Edgar Bones had hung. You caught the boy as though the wand and you were old friends. Most people fight a strange wand for a year. You don't seem to be fighting yours at all. It was delivered lightly, a compliment on its surface, and it was the most dangerous sentence anyone had said to Harry since he arrived, because it was correct, and because Riddle had assembled it from 2 seconds of observation, and because the conclusion underneath it was, you are better than you should be, and I have noticed. This was the moment. Harry had run it a dozen times in the iron bed without knowing what would trigger it. And now it was here, 4 days early in a sunny courtyard, and he had to decide in real time how to play the first real exchange with the boy he had crossed 50 years to read. The wrong move was to deflect, to play small, to insist he was an ordinary student, because Riddle had already seen that he was not, and a denial would simply mark Harry as a liar worth investigating. The right move, the only move, was the one Harry had learned at Dumbledore's bedside. Give a truth, an unfalsifiable one, and let it sit there too large to swallow and too strange to spit out. I've had to learn things fast, Harry said. Where I come from, the people who learned slowly didn't get older. He met Riddle's eyes and held them and let the boy see, for exactly 1 second, the thing under the pleasant manner, the flat, level, unfrightened steadiness of someone who had been somewhere Tom Riddle had only ever imagined. You learn to make whatever wand's in your hand do what you need. You stop waiting for it to like you. The courtyard had gone quiet around the 2 of them. Even the cold seemed to be listening. And Tom Riddle looked at Harry Black with the first genuine flicker of interest Harry had seen cross that perfect face, not the manufactured warmth he handed out to the Slug Club and the professors, but something colder and truer, the attention of a predator that has caught in a familiar field an unfamiliar scent. It was the look of a boy who collected interesting people, and had just found one he could not immediately categorize. It was, Harry understood with a clarity that was almost vertigo, exactly the response he had come here to provoke, and it was also the response of a thing that had now decided quietly to learn everything about him. He had wanted to enter Riddle's orbit. He had just done it in 4 days. The only question now was who between the two of them had actually caught whom. Tom, the voice cut across the courtyard, bright and false, and the spell of the moment broke. A heavy-set boy with a prefect's badge and an ingratiating manner was bustling toward them. Harry placed him by the badge and the bustle before he saw the face. "There you are. Slughorn's been asking after you, something about the little supper on Friday. He wants to know if—" The boy noticed Harry and stopped. "Oh, hello, you're the new one." "This is Harry Black," Riddle said smoothly, and the cold interest had already vanished from his face, tucked away behind the pleasant mask so completely that anyone watching would have thought Harry imagined it. "Black, this is Avery. He carries Professor Slughorn's messages, among his other accomplishments." Avery flushed, unsure whether he had been insulted. Harry was certain he had been, and was equally certain Avery would never be sure, and there was the whole machine of Tom Riddle in a single sentence, the casual cruelty wrapped so neatly in courtesy that the victim thanked you for it. He filed the technique away with the cold, professional appreciation of a man cataloging an enemy's weapons. "Slughorn collects people," Riddle said to Harry, as though sharing a confidence, as they drifted out of the courtyard with Avery trailing behind them like a dropped scarf. "Promising ones. He'll have heard about your performance just now within the hour, and you'll have an invitation to his Friday supper by supper tonight. The Slug Club, the unkind call it. I'd advise you to go." A pause waited. "He is a useful man to be liked by, and it is always worth knowing who else has been collected." "Including you," Harry said. "Especially me." Riddle smiled, and this time it was almost real and almost rueful and entirely calculated. "I am his finest acquisition. He'll tell you so himself, given half a glass of mead. I find it more useful to be valued than to be proud." He stopped at the foot of a staircase where their paths diverged, green up, red down, and turned to face Harry fully, and the courtyard's strange charged stillness came back into the air between them. "I'll see you Friday, Black. I confess I'm curious about you. You have the look of someone who knows things." The pause again. "I like people who know things. They're so much more interesting than the ones who only think they do." "I'll try to stay interesting," Harry said. "Do." And Riddle went up the green stair without looking back, and Harry watched him go and understood that the game had truly begun, that he had been issued an invitation and a warning in the same breath, and that both were sincere, and that the most dangerous boy in Britain had just decided to take an interest in the one person in the castle equipped to destroy him. It was the best possible outcome. It was also, Harry thought, walking down toward the Gryffindor common room with the U-wand heavy in his pocket, very nearly the worst, because to be interesting to Tom Riddle was to be studied by Tom Riddle, and Harry was carrying a secret the size of the future, and he had just lit a lamp beside it and invited the cleverest darkness in the world to come and look. Transfiguration was the first class in which Harry sat in a room with both Dumbledore and the problem of being watched by him, and he learned quickly that the old wizard taught the way he did everything else, by setting a trap so gentle you walked into it grateful. The lesson was on conjuration, the bringing of matter out of nothing, which was sixth-year work and difficult and exactly the sort of thing that separated the talented from the rest. Dumbledore set the class to conjuring small birds, and the room filled with the popping of attempts and the laughter of failures and the occasional damp feather, and Harry conjured a single sparrow on his first try, throttled carefully to the level of good for his year, and let it sit gray and ordinary on the desk, and thought he had judged it correctly. He had not. He felt the blue eyes find him from the front of the room, and he understood that even a deliberately mediocre conjuration, done on the first attempt with no fumbling, was its own kind of tell to a man who had taught 1,000 students how to fail. Across the aisle, Tom Riddle conjured a bird too. Harry watched it out of the corner of his eye, because watching Riddle work was part of the job. The sparrow that formed on Riddle's desk was perfect, not merely solid but vivid, its feathers individually distinct, its small black eye bright with what looked unsettlingly like awareness, and it was better than anything else in the room, and Riddle knew it, and the knowing sat very quietly under his pleasant attention to the lesson. He did not show off. He simply produced something flawless and let it be seen, and accepted Dumbledore's measured, "Well done, Mr. Riddle," with a modest inclination of the head that was its own small performance. "Mr. Black," Dumbledore had drifted down the aisle and stopped at Harry's desk, and the gray sparrow regarded him with the dull indifference Harry had given it. "A serviceable bird. Thank you, Professor." Defense against the dark arts was taught by Galatea Merrythought, a stooped and ancient witch with a voice like dry leaves and an eye that missed nothing, and it was in her classroom that Harry first saw what happened when he and Tom Riddle were made to face each other with wands drawn. She ran the 6th years through paired dueling on the second Thursday, a controlled exercise meant to teach the reading of an opponent rather than the beating of one, and she watched the pairs with the patient boredom of a woman who had seen 60 years of schoolboys throw the same 3 hexes at one another. Then she put Harry against Riddle, because the whole class had been quietly waiting for it, and she was old enough to enjoy giving a room what it wanted, and the boredom went out of her one good eye. They were careful with each other. That was the thing the class never quite understood, and Mary thought understood completely, that the two best duelists in the room, given license to test one another, fought with a restraint that looked from the outside like an even match, and was in fact two people each refusing to show the other how much they were holding back. Riddle's spellwork was beautiful, fast, and economical, and a generation ahead of anyone else present, and Harry met it with a borrowed wand and a deliberate, throttled competence that gave away nothing, turning each curse aside a half-beat slower than he could have, letting the exchange look like the close-run thing it was not. Riddle, probing, raised the pace. Harry matched it, and no more. Riddle tried a feint that would have caught any other student in the school, and Harry read it the way he read everything now and stepped around it without seeming to hurry, and for just an instant their eyes met over the crossing arcs of light, and Harry saw the question in the boy's gaze: how far down does this go? How much are you not showing me? And gave him nothing but a faint, level calm. Enough, said Mary thought, before either had won, and there was something sharp under the dry old voice. Sit down, the pair of you. She looked at them a moment longer than she looked at anyone, her one good eye moving from Riddle's perfect composure to Harry's careful blankness, and Harry had the distinct sense of being weighed by someone who had taught long enough to know that the two most dangerous people in a room are not always the two making the most noise. In 40 years, she said to the class but not to the class, I have seen perhaps 3 students duel as though they had somewhere real to put the skill. It is not a comfortable thing to watch. I should be glad if the two of you found gentler hobbies. The class laughed, taking it for a compliment, and Riddle smiled the modest smile, and Harry looked at his borrowed wand, and only the old witch did not laugh, and as they filed out Harry felt her watchful eye follow them both to the door. One more pair of eyes, he noted, that had looked at him and at Riddle and quietly placed the two of them on the same shelf, the shelf reserved for the people in a school who are something other than children playing at danger. It is a curious thing about conjuration, Dumbledore said, addressing the sparrow rather than Harry, his voice pitched for the two of them alone. The difficulty is never in the power, it is in the restraint. A student who can barely manage the spell gives it everything and produces a poor, frantic creature. A master holds nearly all of it back and produces exactly as much bird as he intends. The hardest thing in my subject, Mr. Black, is to do a great deal less than you are able and to make it look like your limit. The blue eyes lifted from the bird to Harry's face. Your sparrow is very carefully ordinary. I find I admire the control more than I would have admired a finer bird. It was said mildly, almost fondly, and it was a warning shot fired with surgical precision, and Harry received it as such. Dumbledore had seen the throttling. Not the truth beneath it, not yet, but the fact of it, the deliberate dimming, the man holding back the flood. He had announced that he had seen it, gently, in a sentence that any eavesdropper would have heard as a teacher's idol musing on his craft. And he had done it, Harry realized, not to threaten but to inform, to let Harry know that the disguise had a hole in it precisely where the disguise was most careful, so that Harry might mend it before someone less kind than Dumbledore found the same hole. I'll try to give it a little more next time, Professor, Harry said, now that I know it's the ordinariness that stands out. Do. Dumbledore's mouth curved, though not, I think, in front of an audience that includes Mr. Riddle. He notices birds too. And he moved on down the aisle, leaving Harry to sit with the understanding that the old man had just told him 2 things at once. That Dumbledore was watching Harry, and that Dumbledore was watching Riddle, and that some part of Albus Dumbledore had already placed the 2 strangest boys in his classroom on the same shelf in his mind, and was waiting, with terrible patience, to learn what they were to each other. Across the aisle, Riddle's perfect sparrow turned its bright black eye toward Harry's dull gray one, and for a moment the 2 conjured birds regarded each other across the gap between the desks, and Harry did not think he imagined that Riddle was watching the birds watch each other with the faint private smile of a boy enjoying a symbolism only he believed he understood. The rumors found him on the way back from the library 3 nights later, in the form of 2 third-years arguing in a stairwell. Because Marcus said he saw it, the writing, before they scrubbed it off, all about the chamber and the air. Marcus says he's seen a lot of things. Marcus is a liar. Then what's killing the cats? My sister's prefect won't let the little ones go to the greenhouses alone anymore. Some things in the school, Eddie, everyone knows it, they just won't say. They saw Harry on the stair and went silent with the abrupt guilt of children caught discussing the forbidden, and scurried off, and Harry stood very still in the stairwell with the cold running down his spine that had nothing to do with the draft. It was beginning. The cats, the writing, the word chamber loose in the corridors, the overture to the thing he had crossed 50 years to stop was already playing, faint and underground, and the children could hear it the way they had heard nothing else, the way the young always hear the danger the adults have agreed to ignore. Somewhere below the castle, a 16-year-old prefect was, even now, learning to speak to the thing his ancestor had left in the dark, coaxing it, testing it, deciding when and on whom to use it. And somewhere on the grounds, a vast, gentle, half-giant boy was raising a creature he loved in a cupboard, and had no idea that he was being measured for a frame. Harry knew the shape of all of it. He knew that the writing on the wall and the dead cats led, by a road of weeks, to a girl crying in a bathroom and a basilisk in the pipes, and a death that would tear a soul in two. He knew that the death had a name, Myrtle, and that the frame had a name, Hagrid, and that the truth of it had stayed buried for 50 years, because the one boy clever enough to bury it was the one boy nobody had thought to suspect. He knew the whole map. And he understood, standing in the empty stairwell with the library books heavy in his arms, that knowing the map was not the same as having time, and that the overture was already playing, and that whatever he was going to do, he had less of the future to do it in than he had let himself believe. He found Hagrid the next morning because he could not help it, because some things were stronger than tactics. The boy was enormous already at 13, all wrists and elbows, and a face that had not yet decided what to do with itself, and he was crouched by the edge of the forest feeding something out of sight that Harry very carefully did not look at directly. Harry did not approach. He simply stood at a distance for a moment and let himself look at the boy who would one day be the first adult to tell him he was a wizard, decades from now, in a hut that had not yet been built, and felt the grief of it move through him and out, spent rather than folded. "He's not the monster," Harry said quietly to no one, to the cold morning, to the future. "He never was, and this time somebody's going to know it before they break his wand." And he turned and walked back up to the castle and put the grief away, and began, with the cold, clean focus that was the only inheritance his first life had left him, to count exactly how many days he had until a girl who did not know her own name was famous yet was going to die in a bathroom, unless a stranger from 50 years away got there first. He did not sleep much that night, and the part of him that did not sleep spent the dark hours doing what it did best, which was planning. He had learned more in 4 days than he had any right to, and he laid it out the way he had once laid out the locations of the Horcruxes, not as a list but as a map with the dangers marked. Riddle was, first, exactly as intelligent as the histories said and considerably more careful than they implied. The boy gave away nothing he did not choose to give, ran a smooth public face over a cold private engine, and had already flagged Harry Black as a puzzle worth solving. Riddle was, second, not yet what he would become. There was a vanity in him, a need to be valued by Slughorn and admired by the Averys of the world, that the red-eyed thing in the graveyard had burned away entirely. That vanity was a vulnerability and a tell. The Voldemort Harry had fought had wanted nothing from anyone. This boy still wanted things. A creature that wants things can be steered. And Riddle was, third. Harry made himself look directly at this, because it was the most important observation and the most uncomfortable, not obviously, visibly, already a monster. That was the thing the dead man's memories had never quite conveyed. In Dumbledore's pensive, knowing what the boy became, you saw the monster in every frame. In a sunny courtyard, not knowing, you saw a brilliant, charming, slightly cold 16-year-old who had caught your eye and made you feel briefly that you were the only person worth talking to. The cruelty to Avery had been real, and the cold under the warmth had been real, but they were the cruelty and coldness of a damaged, clever boy, not yet of a thing that tortured for sport. Harry could not yet tell, and this was the entire question, the one his whole rule hung on, whether the soul behind those eyes was already torn, or still whole and merely waiting for the bathroom and the basilisk to tear it. He needed to know. Everything downstream depended on it. If the soul was whole, there was a road he could not yet see the end of, a road where the war simply never happened because the boy who would start it was turned aside before the first cut. If it was already torn, if some private murder Harry had no record of had already split it, then the road was shorter and darker, and ended with Harry doing the thing in a forest he had sworn not to do on foreknowledge alone, except that it would no longer be on foreknowledge alone, it would be on proof. Friday, then, the Slug Club supper. He would go, and he would let Slughorn collect him, and he would sit at a table with Tom Riddle and watch the boy at close range with the whole of the attention a year of war had taught him, and he would begin to find his answer. There was a sound at the window. Harry was across the dormitory with the U-wand up before he had consciously identified it, and then he saw what it was and lowered the wand slowly. An owl, gray and enormous, sitting on the sill with a roll of parchment in its beak and an air of having been kept waiting. He let it in. The parchment was an invitation, of course. Professor H.E.F. Slughorn requests the pleasure. The looping self-important hand, the Friday supper, exactly as Riddle had predicted, delivered before midnight as Riddle had predicted, because Riddle had read the whole sequence of events the moment Edgar Bones hit the air, and had simply been narrating the future to Harry in the courtyard like a man reading aloud from a book he had already finished. And underneath Slughorn's loops in different ink, in a hand Harry had seen once before in a diary that screamed, a single added line, "I hope you'll come." T.R. Harry stood in the moonlight with the parchment in his hand and felt the cold of it. The way Riddle had reached into Slughorn's invitation and added himself to it, made the welcome partly his, claimed a small piece of Harry's arrival the way he claimed everything he found interesting. It was a courtesy. It was a marker laid down on a contested square. It was, in its small, precise way, the most chilling thing that had happened to Harry since he woke in 1943, because it was so very deft and so very practiced, and so very much the gesture of a boy who was used to making people feel chosen as the first step in owning them. He thought of the second year he had caught, and the warm hand of Septimus Weasley, and Carissa's surprised laugh, and the whole bright unhaunted castle full of children who did not know. He thought of Hermione, alive now in a future that had not happened yet, that might never happen, that he had been thrown half a century to protect. He looked at the line in Riddle's hand, "I hope you'll come," and he understood that the boy had no idea, none at all, that the new transfer he had decided to find interesting was the one person in the history of the world who had come back specifically to end him. The asymmetry was total. Riddle thought he was hunting a curiosity. Harry knew he was being hunted by his own executioner. And the executioner stood at the window in the moonlight and turned the invitation over in his hands, and felt no triumph and no fear, only the cold, clean clarity that had carried him through one war and would have to carry him through the unmaking of this one before it began. "All right," Harry said softly, to the boy who could not hear him, 50 years and 4 corridors away. Friday. He set the parchment on the table and lay back down, and watched the moon track across the dormitory ceiling until it was nearly morning, and somewhere below him in the dungeons the boy who would be Voldemort slept the easy sleep of someone who had never once imagined he could lose. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Mission Slughorn's office had been transfigured for the evening into something between a drawing room and a shrine to its owner, and the centerpiece of the shrine was a long table laid with crystal and candlelight, and the centerpiece of the table was Tom Riddle, and everyone in the room had been arranged, whether they knew it or not, to face him. Harry came in last, and on purpose, because arriving last let him read the room before the room read him. Horace Slughorn was younger and slimmer than the walrus of Harry's memory, but unmistakably himself, all expansive gestures and crystallized pineapple, and the genial, grasping warmth of a man who loved talent the way other men loved money. He swept Harry up at the door. "Black, the American, the boy who plucked young bones out of the air. Albus has told me nothing about you, which means there is everything to know," and steered him to a chair that had been left, Harry noted, directly across from Riddle's. Of course it had. Slughorn seated his prizes where he could watch them shine off one another. "Now," Slughorn said, when the soup had come and the candle warmth had loosened everyone, "I make it a rule never to let a new face go uninterrogated. Mr. Black, America, they tell me. Which school?" "A small one," Harry said. "You won't have heard of it. We didn't have a man like you to put us on the map." He said it lightly, with just enough flattery to be a gift and not enough to be a bribe, and watched Slughorn's face do the thing he had counted on it doing: soften, expand, decide that this quiet American understood the proper order of things. Down the table, Riddle's mouth moved a fraction. He had seen the technique. He had recognized it, Harry thought, because it was his own. The supper went on, and Harry led it and spent it doing the only thing he had come to do, which was to watch Tom Riddle at close range with the whole of the attention a war had taught him. And what he saw was a master class, and it frightened him more than the graveyard had, because the graveyard had been a monster being a monster, and this was a monster being a boy. Riddle worked the table like an instrument. He drew out a shy Ravenclaw girl who had said nothing all evening, asked her about her grandmother's work on healing charms, listened with an attention so total that the girl bloomed under it, and talked for 5 minutes, and left the supper believing Tom Riddle was the kindest boy she had ever met. He deflected Slughorn's praise with exactly enough modesty to earn more of it. He told a story that made the whole table laugh, and arranged, within the story, for a boy named Lestrange to look slightly foolish and never know he had been arranged. And underneath all of it, behind the warmth and the wit and the flawless social machine, the eyes stayed cold and stayed working, cataloging, weighing, deciding who at this table was useful and who was furniture, and the answer to that question was written nowhere on his lovely, animated face. "He's not enjoying this," Harry understood halfway through the pudding. "None of it. He's performing enjoyment so perfectly that everyone here would swear he was the happiest soul at the table, and he is feeling nothing at all except the cold pleasure of doing it well." It was the single most important observation Harry had made since he arrived, and he held it carefully because it cut in 2 directions at once. A boy who felt nothing while perfectly mimicking feeling was already very far down a dark road. But a boy who still bothered to perform, who still wanted the room's warmth even if he could not feel it, who still needed to be the center and the favorite and the best, was a boy who still wanted something from other people, and wanting was a door, and Harry had come here to find the door. "You're very quiet, Mr. Black," Riddle said across the candles, and the whole table's attention swung to Harry because Riddle had chosen to point it there. "You watch a great deal more than you speak." "I find I do the same. It makes the people who only speak so nervous." The smile he offered was warm, and the eyes above it were not. "What do you see when you watch us?" It was a test. Harry knew it was a test the moment it left Riddle's mouth, a probe dressed as a pleasantry, an invitation to reveal himself in front of an audience, to either flatter the table or insult it, and in either case to show his hand. The whole supper had been arranged, Harry suspected, partly so that Riddle could ask exactly this question and watch exactly how Harry answered it. "I see a room full of people who'd be lost without each other and won't admit it," Harry said, and let his eyes move over the table, kindly, slowly, and one person who could walk out of it and never look back and not feel a thing. He brought his gaze to rest on Riddle and held it and let his voice stay gentle. "I'd rather be one of the lost ones. It costs more, but you get to keep something." The table laughed uncertainly, taking it for philosophy. Slughorn beamed and called it deep, very deep. The Americans are deeper than we credit them. And Tom Riddle looked at Harry across the candlelight with no expression at all for the length of 2 full seconds. The warm mask simply gone, packed away, leaving the cold engine bare, and Harry looked back, and the two of them sat in a pocket of stillness in the middle of the noisy room, and something passed between them that had no name and needed none. "You see me," Riddle's silence said. "Most people don't." "I see you," Harry's silence answered. "Better than you know." Then the mask came back, smooth and warm, and Riddle laughed and turned the moment into a joke at Avery's expense, and the supper rolled on, and only the two of them knew that the first real shot of the war had just been fired across a table of crystal and crystallized pineapple, and that neither of them had flinched. Harry built the decision tree that night properly on parchment he would burn before morning, because some plans need to be seen with the eyes and not just held in the head. At the top he wrote the question on which everything hung. 3 words, can he change? Beneath it, 2 branches. If yes, if the soul behind those eyes was still whole, still capable of being turned, still a person and not yet a thing, then there existed a road, narrow and unproven, on which Tom Riddle never became Voldemort because someone reached him before the first cut and gave him a reason to choose differently. It was the road Dumbledore had failed to walk in the original telling, because Dumbledore had met Riddle too late and trusted him too little and watched too suspiciously, and Riddle had felt the suspicion and hardened against it. Harry had the one thing Dumbledore had lacked. He knew exactly what was at stake, and he had arrived in time, and he could offer the boy something no one in his real life had ever offered him. If the soul was already torn, if some murder Harry had no record of had already split it, if the thing at the candlelit table was already past the reach of any kindness, then the tree had only one other branch, and Harry wrote it without flinching because flinching from it would not make it less true. And cleanly, certainly, before the chamber, before the death, before the boy became the thing that buried everyone Harry loved, not on foreknowledge, on proof. The whole war, Harry thought, looking at the burning parchment as the flame took can he change and curled it to ash, came down to telling those 2 branches apart. And there was only one way to tell them apart, and it was the most dangerous thing he had yet conceived of, and he was going to do it anyway, because he had not crossed 50 years to be a coward at the decisive moment. He was going to run a test. He was going to offer Tom Riddle a genuine kindness, unearned, unbought, with nothing asked in return, and he was going to watch, with the whole cold attention of a man reading an enemy's defenses, what the boy did with it. A person who had never in his life received a thing he did not have to take, manipulate, or earn would not know what to do with an honest gift. He would suspect it. He would probe it for the hook. And the way he probed it, whether he eventually accepted it as real, or whether he could only ever understand it as a move in a game he assumed everyone was playing, would tell Harry, more reliably than any memory and any pensive, whether there was still a whole person in there capable of believing that another person might simply be kind. It was, Harry knew, a test that could blow up in his face spectacularly. To offer Tom Riddle a gift was to hand him a thread to pull, and Riddle pulled every thread, and the thread led back to a secret the size of the future. But Harry had learned long ago that you cannot read a man from across a room. You have to get close enough to be hurt by him. That was the price of knowing, and Harry had always been willing to pay the prices other people balked at, and he paid this one too. Riddle was running his own investigation, and Harry caught the edges of it the way you catch a draft in a sealed house, by the small wrongnesses it left behind. It started with Slughorn. Harry came early to potions evening and found the professor unusually thoughtful and steered the talk, and learned without seeming to ask that young Tom had been by, full of charming curiosity about the American transfer, wondering aloud whether the boy's people might be the Boston Blacks or the old New Orleans line, whether anyone had thought to write to Ilvermorny to confirm his standing, whether it wasn't all just a touch irregular. It was beautifully done. Slughorn had not registered it as an interrogation. He had registered it as Tom being his usual considerate self, taking an interest in a newcomer's welfare. But Harry, who had built the cover and knew exactly where its seams were, heard the sound of a clever hand running along those seams looking for the place where they did not quite meet. He found more of it through the week. A 7th year he didn't know tried twice to draw him into conversation about America, about cities he should have known, a Quidditch league he should have followed, a school song he should have been able to hum, and the questions were too well aimed to be idle, and Harry recognized the shape of them because they were the questions he himself would have asked if he wanted to catch a man in a false history. Riddle had set someone to test the cover's surface. And the owl traffic in the owlery had changed. Harry, who watched everything now, saw that letters had gone out south, toward London, toward the kind of records office a determined student with a prefect's privileges might persuade to answer a query about transfer paperwork that did not exist. Harry sat with all of it one evening in the library in his own far corner, and weighed how worried to be, and concluded, worried enough to move faster, not worried enough to panic. The cover would hold against ordinary scrutiny, the records were genuinely slow, the war genuinely fogged the transatlantic channels, and a query to Ilvermorny in 1943 would take 6 weeks to fail to come back, by which time the term and the world would have moved. But it would not hold against Tom Riddle indefinitely, because Tom Riddle was not ordinary scrutiny. He was the most patient, most thorough, most relentless intelligence in the castle, and he had now formally decided that Harry Black was a problem to be solved, and a problem Tom Riddle had decided to solve stayed solved, at eventually the way water finds the crack eventually, given only time. So it came down to time again, the way everything did. Harry had until the cover failed. He did not know how long that was. He knew only that there were now 2 races running side by side, his race to reach the boy before the chamber, and the boy's race to reach the truth of Harry before either of them was ready, and that the 2 races were tangled, because the closer Harry got to Riddle the more Riddle could observe him, and the more Riddle observed him the faster the cover would fray. Intimacy was his only weapon and his only wound. To do the job he had to let the most dangerous mind in Britain watch him at close range, and the watching was exactly what would eventually undo him. He decided he could live with that. He had never had a plan that didn't require him to walk toward the thing that could kill him. It was, more or less, the only kind of plan he knew how to make. He would simply have to be faster than the fraying. He would have to reach whatever was reachable in Tom Riddle before Tom Riddle reached the bottom of Harry Black, and if it came to it, if the cover tore before the work was done, he would have to be ready to stop hiding and start fighting in the same breath, because the moment Riddle knew what Harry truly was would be the most dangerous moment of both their lives, and Harry intended to choose the ground it happened on rather than let Riddle choose it for him. He closed the ledger and put the worry away where he put everything, and turned his mind back to the gentler and more important question, whether the boy could be saved at all, because the investigation was a clock, and clocks only mattered if there was still something worth doing before they ran down, and Harry had not yet given up believing there was. The chance came 4 days later, and Harry made it himself, the way he made most of his chances. He had learned Riddle's rhythms by then. The boy was a creature of pattern beneath the improvisation, and Harry had spent a year learning to read patterns under fire. Riddle spent the hour before dinner most evenings alone in a particular alcove of the library, the one farthest from the door. With the rarest books the restricted section would let a prefect sign out, and he did not like to be disturbed there, and the fact that he did not like to be disturbed there was precisely why Harry chose it. He did not go empty-handed. He had spent 2 days in the stacks finding the right thing, because the gift had to be real to work. A token kindness would read as a token and tell him nothing. What he found was a slim, cracked, water-stained volume of parcel script, a collection of the old serpent-tongue writings that almost no one in the castle could read, and that Riddle, heir of Slytherin, could read as easily as English. It was the kind of book Riddle would want and would never ask for, because asking for it would reveal what he was, and Harry set it down on the table in the farthest alcove without a word and turned to go. "Why?" said Tom Riddle behind him. Harry stopped. He had known the question would come. He had counted on it. "Because I noticed you reading the parcel script notations in the margins of the Borgia text last week," Harry said, turning back, "when you thought no one was watching. And I found this in the stacks, and almost nobody in this castle could get a word out of it, and you can. It seemed a waste for it to sit there." He shrugged easily and let the next part be true, because the true part was the test. "I don't want anything for it. I'm not collecting you, Riddle. I just thought you'd like the book." Tom Riddle looked at the book. He did not touch it. For a long moment he looked at it the way a man looks at a trap that has been left conspicuously in his path, and then he lifted his eyes to Harry's face, and they were not cold now. They were working, running fast behind the stillness, and Harry watched them work with the held breath of a man reading a verdict as it is written. "You noticed me reading parcel script," Riddle said slowly, "which I read only when I am certain I am alone. You knew it was parcel script, which most wizards could not identify. You found a book in it, which means you searched for one, which means you spent your own time, and you say you want nothing." He tilted his head, the small, dangerous tilt. "Do you understand, Black, that everything you have just told me is an admission, that you were watching me closely enough to catch something I hide on purpose, that you have been studying me?" And there it was, the verdict, written in the first lines, exactly as Harry had feared and exactly as he had needed. He had offered an honest gift, and Tom Riddle had been constitutionally incapable of receiving it as one. The kindness had not registered as kindness. It had registered as surveillance. The boy could not conceive of a gift that was not a move, could not imagine that someone might simply notice him and wish him well, and so he had taken the one genuinely warm gesture anyone had offered him in years and parsed it, instantly and flawlessly, as an act of espionage. It told Harry a great deal. None of it was simple, because the terrible thing, the thing that complicated the clean answer Harry had half hoped for, was that Riddle was not wrong. Harry had been watching him. The gift was part of a larger move. The boy's paranoia had read the situation more accurately than Harry's kindness had disguised it, and that was not the response of a thing too far gone to think. It was the response of a brilliant, wounded, isolated person who had learned, somewhere very early, that everyone was always playing, and who had survived by being the best player in every room, and who was, in this exact moment, correct. The test had not given Harry the answer he wanted. It had given him a worse and truer one, that Tom Riddle was not yet a monster but was already a fortress, and that the walls had gone up so long ago and so completely that there might be no longer any way to tell whether there was still a person behind them, because the person, if he existed, had not been allowed out in years. "You're right," Harry said. Riddle blinked. It was the first wholly involuntary thing Harry had ever seen him do. "I was studying you," Harry went on calm, "because the only way through a mind like this was to refuse the game it expected. I've been studying you since the courtyard. You're the most interesting person in this castle, and I'd be a fool not to. But here's the part your suspicion can't account for, Riddle, so I'll say it plainly and you can do what you like with it." He stepped closer and did not lower his voice and let the boy see that he was unafraid. "I can study a person and still want good things for them. Those aren't opposites. The fact that you think they have to be, that a gift has to be a hook, that attention has to be a trap, that's not cleverness. That's a wound. Somebody taught you that a long time ago and they were wrong, and you've been paying for their lesson ever since." The library was very quiet. Somewhere far off a book shelved itself. For one moment, one single moment that Harry would turn over in his mind for weeks afterward, trying to decide whether he had imagined it, something flickered behind Tom Riddle's eyes that was not calculation. Something young and raw and almost unbearably hungry looked out at Harry through the fortress walls, the way a prisoner looks out through a slot in a door at a person walking free in the sun. It was there, and then it was gone, slammed shut, mortared over, and the cold, smooth surface came back across the boy's face like ice forming on a pond. "That's a very pretty theory," Riddle said, and his voice was perfectly even and the warmth had been surgically removed from it. "Here is mine. I think you are not what you say you are. I think Harry Black is a name you chose, and a school you can't name, and a country no owl can reach, and a wand that obeys you far too well for a borrowed one. I think you arrived from nowhere, knowing things you shouldn't, and you have attached yourself to me with a great show of disinterested kindness, and people do not do that, Black, not without a reason." He picked up the parcel script book then at last and turned it over in his long fingers and did not thank Harry for it. "I will keep the book, I will read it, and I will find out what you are. I always find out." He looked up and smiled, and the smile was beautiful, and it was a declaration of war. "I rather hope you're as interesting as you seem. It would be such a disappointment if you were only a spy." He left, the book under his arm, and Harry stood alone in the farthest alcove of the library and understood that the test had succeeded in the way tests sometimes do, by answering a question he had not thought to ask. He had wanted to know if Riddle could change. He had learned instead that Riddle had now, formally and deliberately, set himself to uncovering Harry's secret, and that the boy was clever enough to do it, and that the clock Harry had been measuring against the death of a girl in a bathroom was now also measuring against the day Tom Riddle pulled the thread of Harry Black all the way back to the truth. 2 clocks now, both running, both his to beat. Dumbledore sent for him the next evening, and Harry went, because he had been deciding for days how much of the truth to spend on the one man in 1943 who could either be his greatest ally or the swift end of everything, and he had concluded that the decision could not be made in the abstract. He had to sit across from the man and feel the size of the risk. The Transfiguration office was warm with candlelight and cluttered with the instruments of a curious mind: a tank of newts mid-transfiguration, a shelf of self-shuffling card decks, a perch where a young phoenix Harry recognized with a pang dozed with its head under one wing. Dumbledore poured 2 cups of something that steamed and smelled of cinnamon, and handed one across, and let the silence sit until Harry understood that the old man intended him to break it. "You've been watching Tom Riddle," Dumbledore said at last when Harry did not oblige, "and you've been watching the Warren girl, the one who cries, and you found the writing on the wall before the prefects did, and you did not report it, which a frightened transfer student would certainly have done." The blue eyes were kind and unhurried and entirely relentless. "I have been a teacher a long time, Mr. Black. I know the difference between a boy who has stumbled into something and a boy who is conducting an operation. You are conducting an operation. I would like very much to know what it is and whether I ought to be helping you or stopping you." It was the most direct thing the man had said to him, and Harry recognized the gift in it. Dumbledore was not accusing him. He was offering with that terrible patience to be on Harry's side if Harry would only give him a reason. And Harry sat with the cinnamon steam rising into his face and ran, one last time, the calculation he had been running for days. He could tell Dumbledore everything. The temptation was enormous, and he examined it honestly. Dumbledore was the most powerful wizard alive, the one man who would eventually beat Grindelwald and hold the wand that conquered death, and with that power on Harry's side, the whole task became less a knife edge and more a campaign. But Harry had not forgotten what he knew about this version of the man. This Dumbledore was younger, prouder, more wounded, still carrying the body of a dead sister, and the wreckage of a love that had nearly ended the world, still uncertain of his own judgment in exactly the place where Harry needed him certain. And this Dumbledore did not yet know to fear Tom Riddle. If Harry told him the truth, that boy becomes a dark lord who murders thousands, and I have come from the future to stop him. Dumbledore would not believe the impossible part and might well act on the dangerous part, might confront Riddle prematurely, might harden the boy against him exactly as he had in the original telling, might turn a fortress that was merely suspicious into a fortress that knew it was under siege. So Harry gave him a third thing, which was neither the whole truth nor a lie, and which was the most expensive piece of his secret he had yet spent on anyone. I'm going to tell you something true, Harry said, and I'm going to ask you not to ask me how I know it, because the how would cost you more than the what, and you'd spend the rest of your life unable to prove either. He set the cup down. There is something very wrong with Tom Riddle, not wrong like a troubled boy, wrong like a fault line. He is the most gifted student you have ever taught, and you know it, and you also know, because you watch him the way I watch him, that there is nothing behind the gift. No floor. He performs warmth he doesn't feel, and admiration he holds in contempt and modesty that is pure strategy, and the only thing he has ever actually wanted is to never be powerless again, and he will do anything to secure that anything at all, and the day is coming when anything stops being a figure of speech. Harry held the blue gaze. The writing on the wall is his, the chamber is real, and he's opened it, and a student is going to die, and he's going to be glad. That's what I'm here to stop. And I'm telling you because I can't be everywhere, and because you are the only adult in this castle who has already half seen the truth and lacked only someone to say it out loud. The office was silent. The phoenix shifted on its perch. Dumbledore did not reach for Harry's mind again, that restraint, that refusal to take by force what he might be given freely, but his face had changed, the geniality thinned to something older and graver, and Harry understood that he had said the one thing capable of being believed. Not the impossible future, but the visible present, the thing Dumbledore had already seen with his own eyes and had not let himself name. You are asking me, Dumbledore said slowly, to believe that a 16-year-old boy, a brilliant, orphan, charming boy who has never put a foot wrong in 5 years at this school, is a murderer in the making. On the word of a transfer student who appeared from nowhere a fortnight ago and will not tell me how he knows anything. He turned the cup in his long fingers. Do you know how that sounds, Mr. Black? It sounds insane, Harry said. It sounds exactly as insane as the truth always sounds before it happens. He leaned forward. So don't believe me, Professor. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to watch him. Really watch him the way you watch me, with the suspicion you keep talking yourself out of because he's so very gifted and so very charming and it would be such a waste. Watch him and watch the Warren girl, and when a student is attacked, not if, when, remember that I told you first. That's all. Just remember I told you first. For a long moment Dumbledore studied him, and Harry let himself be studied, because he had nothing left to hide on this particular point, and a man like Dumbledore could always tell when the hiding had stopped. And then the old wizard set down his cup, and something in his face settled, not belief, not yet, but the suspension of disbelief, the decision to keep an open mind on a thing he very much wished to dismiss. I have spent a great deal of my life, Dumbledore said quietly, wishing to believe the best of gifted and damaged young men, because I was once a gifted and damaged young man whom someone wished to believe the best of, and it cost the world a great deal. The grief in it was old and real, and Harry, who knew its source, said nothing. I have promised myself I would not make that error again. And here you are asking me to make precisely the opposite error, to believe the worst of a boy who has given me no proof of it. I find I cannot do either thing on command, but I can watch. I am very good at watching. The eyes lifted. And I will watch you too, Mr. Black, because a man who knows this much about a danger no one else can see is either the only honest person in the room or the most dangerous, and I have not yet decided which. That's fair, Harry said, and meant it. It is not fair at all, Dumbledore said, with the ghost of his old warmth returning. It is merely prudent. Fairness and prudence are so rarely the same thing that I think is the whole tragedy of governing anything, including a school. He rose, and the audience was over, and at the door he laid a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, and the gesture was so unguardedly kind that Harry had to look away from it. Whatever you are, Harry Black, and I do not yet know, you are carrying something far too heavy for a boy your age. I have seen that weight before. I have carried it. If it ever becomes more than you can bear alone, my door does not lock. Remember that too. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the dark, with the cinnamon still on his tongue and the weight of the hand still on his shoulder, and understood that he had gained exactly what he had come for, and no more not an ally who knew the truth, but a sentinel who would now be watching the right boy with the right suspicion, a second pair of eyes on the fault line, a hedge against the very real chance that Harry would not be enough. It was less than he wanted. It was a great deal more than the original telling had ever had, and it had cost him a piece of his secret he could never take back, because Dumbledore would remember this conversation and would weigh it against everything that came after. And the day the writing on the wall came true, the old man would know that the strange transfer student had told him first, which made Harry forever after a person Albus Dumbledore could not stop wondering about. 2 clocks, he had thought, leaving the library. He corrected it now, climbing the moving stair. 3. The death of a girl, the unmasking of his cover by Riddle, and the slow turning of Dumbledore's mind toward the question of what, exactly, Harry Black was, and which of the 3 ran down first would decide everything. He turned to the chamber because the chamber would not wait for his philosophy, and because action was the only cure he had ever found for a problem that had grown too large to think about all at once. He knew things no one else in the castle knew. He knew the entrance was in a bathroom on the 2nd floor, behind a tap marked with a snake. He knew the monster was a basilisk, and that it moved through the pipes, and that it killed with its eyes, and that the only people it had killed so far were cats, because Riddle was still learning to aim it. He knew that the girl who would die was named Myrtle Warren, a plain, tearful, much-mocked Ravenclaw who spent more time crying in that exact bathroom than anywhere else in the school, which was precisely why she would be there, alone, on the night the thing came up the pipes. And he knew that her death was the hinge, that her death was the murder Riddle would use to tear his soul and turn a diary into the first Horcrux, and that if Myrtle Warren did not die in that bathroom, the first Horcrux did not get made, and the whole architecture of Voldemort's immortality lost its foundation stone before it was ever laid. So he would keep Myrtle Warren out of that bathroom. It was the cleanest intervention available to him, no confrontation, no exposure, just a girl who, on the wrong night, happened not to be where the monster came looking. He did not yet know the night, but he knew the girl and he knew where to find her, and he began quietly to find her. It was harder than it should have been, and the difficulty taught him something. Myrtle Warren was not easy to befriend because the world had taught her, as it had taught Riddle in a darker key, that kindness was a setup for cruelty. She cried in the bathroom because the other girls mocked her glasses and her acne and her crying, and when Harry first tried to simply talk to her she fled, certain he was setting her up for a joke. He had to go slowly. He had to be patient in a way that cost him days he was not sure he had. And as he sat outside that bathroom evening after evening, coaxing a frightened girl into believing that one person in the castle did not despise her, he came to understand the deeper architecture of the thing he was fighting, and it chilled him more than the basilisk did. Riddle and Myrtle were the same wound, turned in opposite directions. Both had been taught young that the world was cruel and people were not to be trusted. Myrtle had collapsed inward under the lesson, become small and tearful and a target. Riddle had built outward from it, become a fortress, become the cleverest and coldest thing in every room so that no one could ever hurt him again. And the monster in the pipes was going to use one of them to destroy the other. The fortress would aim the basilisk at the victim, and the victim's death would complete the fortress, and the cruelty Harry was fighting was not a thing Riddle did. It was a thing that had been done to him and was now propagating forward through him like a crack through ice, and the only way to stop it propagating was to get in front of it before it reached the next person. He was getting in front of it. He had nearly won Myrtle's trust. Another week and she would come to him before she went to that bathroom alone, and the hinge of the war would simply fail to turn. And then, 11 days after the supper, Harry found the writing on the wall and understood that he had read the clock wrong. It was on the 2nd floor corridor, fresh, the letters tall and dripping, and they were not the words he remembered from the histories. The histories said the chamber had been opened and the message left late in the term, with weeks of warning. But here were the words, months early, and beneath the standard threat about the heir and the enemies of Slytherin there was a second line, smaller in the same dripping hand, that no history had ever recorded because in the original telling it had never been written. The crying one is first. Harry stood in the empty corridor and felt the floor drop out of his certainty. The timeline was not the timeline he knew. It was running faster and it was running darker, and Riddle, whether because Harry's arrival had changed something, or because the histories had simply been wrong about the dates, had already chosen his victim and announced her, and the crying one could only be one girl in the entire castle, and Harry had perhaps not weeks but days, perhaps not days but hours. And he had been sitting outside a bathroom coaxing a frightened child into trust while the clock he thought he was beating had already run most of the way down. He turned and ran for the 2nd floor bathroom, the U-wand already in his hand, no longer throttled, no longer careful because the time for careful was over. And as he ran, one cold, clear thought cut through everything else, the thought that would define every move he made from this night forward. He had come back to rewrite history. He had not understood until this corridor that history could rewrite itself faster than he could read it, and that the boy he was fighting was not a fixed point in a story he had memorized, but a living, learning, accelerating thing that had just proven it could move first. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Getting close to Riddle, Harry hit the bathroom door at a dead run, and the cold came out to meet him. It rolled off the tiles like the breath of a cellar, the unmistakable wrongness of the thing in the pipes, and Harry knew before his eyes adjusted that he was close, too close, almost too late. Myrtle Warren was there, exactly where he had feared, crouched in the far stall with her glasses fogged and her face blotched from crying, too lost in her own misery to have heard the hiss building in the wall behind the sinks. And the sinks were moving. The tap with the snake scratched into its side was turning, slow and inexorable, and the dark mouth behind it was opening, and from somewhere deep below came a sound Harry had heard once before in his life and had hoped never to hear again, the dry, vast, sliding sound of something enormous waking up and beginning to climb. He had perhaps 4 seconds, and he did not waste them on the door or the girl or the fear. "Myrtle," he said, and his voice came out flat and absolute, the voice that did not permit argument, the voice he had used to move terrified people through corpses and curses in another life. "Eyes shut, now, don't open them, don't look up, no matter what you hear, come to my voice." And the girl who had spent her whole short life being mocked and had perhaps never once been spoken to as though her survival mattered, did the thing that saved her. She obeyed. She squeezed her eyes shut and put out a hand, and Harry crossed the wet tiles and took it and pulled her up and behind him, between his body and the door, and turned to face the opening sink with the U-wand level and the whole of his power finally, fully unthrottled for the first time since 1943. The basilisk's head broke from the pipe. It was smaller than the one he had killed at 12, younger, still growing, and it was still 30 feet of muscle and venom with eyes that could stop a heart, and it came out of the dark fast and questing, tasting the air, and Harry did not look at it. He had learned that lesson in a chamber under a different version of the same castle, with a sword and a phoenix and a great deal of luck he no longer had. He fixed his eyes on the wet reflection of the thing in the flooded floor and read its movement from there, and when its head swung toward the sound of Myrtle's terrified breathing he was already moving. He did not try to kill it. He had no sword, no rooster's crow, no time, and a duel with a basilisk in a tiled room with a child at his back was a fight he would lose. So he did the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that required him to stop hiding what he was. He brought the water up. The bathroom was flooded ankle deep from the weeping pipes, and Harry took all of that water in a single vast wrench of will and threw it, not at the basilisk but around it, a roaring spiral that wrapped the great serpent in a churning blinding column, robbing it of the air and the sightlines it hunted by, a working of raw elemental force that no sixth year in the history of Hogwarts could have managed, and that Harry produced as easily as breathing because he had stopped, finally and entirely. Pretending to be ordinary, the basilisk thrashed inside the water, its tail cracked a sink from the wall. And in the 3 seconds of chaos he had bought, Harry hauled Myrtle out the door and slammed it and sealed it with a word that fused the frame to the stone, and stood in the corridor with the screaming girl in his arms and the muffled fury of the thing battering the other side, and knew with absolute cold certainty that he had just won the most important 3 seconds of the war and lost something else in the winning, because the corridor was not empty. Tom Riddle stood at the far end of it very still, and he had seen everything, the open door, the column of water, the impossible power, the boy who had moved a flood with a flick of a borrowed wand and sealed a chamber with a word. He had come, of course, to watch his monster work. He had come to see the crying one die, the way he had promised on the wall. And instead he had seen Harry Black do magic that did not belong in a school, and his face, for the first time since Harry had met him, was not composed. It was open, it was alight, it was the face of a starving man who has just been shown a feast. "What," Tom Riddle said softly into the dripping silence, "are you?" It changed everything that night in the corridor, and Harry spent the days after it learning exactly how. He had been planning to work his way into Riddle's orbit slowly, a careful inch at a time, an interesting transfer becoming gradually indispensable. The basilisk had detonated that plan and replaced it with something faster and far more dangerous. Riddle no longer found Harry merely interesting, he found him necessary. He had seen Harry do a thing that he, Tom Riddle, the most gifted student in the castle, could not do, and a boy whose entire architecture was built on never being powerless again had just discovered someone more powerful than himself, and he could not look away from it, and he could not let it go, and he wanted it the way he wanted nothing else in the world. He wanted to know how it was done. Harry had known this would happen if he ever showed his hand, and he had calculated in the 4 seconds before he threw the water that a living Myrtle was worth the cost. He stood by that. But he had to manage the cost now, and the cost was that Tom Riddle had attached himself to Harry with the full, cold, total focus of his attention, and the focus was no longer suspicious. It was hungry, and hunger was harder to steer than suspicion, because a suspicious man keeps his distance and a hungry one comes close. So Harry let him come close because the whole mission required it, and because there was no longer any other move on the board. They began to spend time together, real time, hours of it, in the library, in the empty classrooms, and the long walks around the lake that the early autumn allowed. To the castle it looked like a friendship, the brilliant prefect and the mysterious American, and the castle found it natural enough. Riddle collected remarkable people, and Harry was plainly remarkable. Only the two of them knew what it actually was, two of the most dangerous minds the wizarding world would ever produce, circling each other across a chessboard neither would name, each trying to learn the other faster than the other learned him. And the terrible thing, the thing Harry had not let himself anticipate, the thing that no amount of planning in an iron bed had prepared him for, was that he liked it. He had not expected to like it. He had braced himself to endure Riddle's company the way you endure a necessary poison, in measured doses, with the antidote close to hand. He had not braced himself for the conversations to be the best conversations he had since he died, but they were. Tom Riddle, when he stopped performing, and with Harry increasingly he stopped performing because performance was wasted on someone who could see through it, was the most extraordinary mind Harry had ever encountered. He was curious about everything. He saw connections no one else saw. He could take an idea Harry offered and turn it over and hand it back transformed, sharper, 3 moves further along than Harry had left it. Talking to him was like talking to the cleverest, coldest, most attentive part of Harry's own mind, externalized and seated across a table, and Harry understood for the first time, viscerally, the thing the histories had never been able to convey, why people had followed this man. Not been forced, followed, because to have the full attention of Tom Riddle, to be found worthy by him, to be the one person in the room he chose to truly speak to, it was the most flattering and most addictive thing in the world, and Harry felt the pull of it even knowing exactly what it was, even knowing it for the perfect, practiced lure that it had always been. That was the danger no one had warned him about, not that Riddle would hurt him, that Riddle would be good company. That the boy he had crossed 50 years to destroy would turn out to be, in the hours they spent together, the closest thing to a friend Harry had had since a green light took everything else away. Harry held the knowledge of it carefully and did not let it move him, because he had learned in a forest that you can love a thing and still do what must be done to it, and he suspected, by the end, he was going to have to. "You won't tell me how you did it," Riddle said on one of the lake walks, not for the first time. "The water, the seal, none of it was 6th-year work, Black, none of it was even 7th-year work. I have read every defensive text in the restricted section, and there is nothing that does what you did with that flood. Where did you learn it?" "Somewhere you can't go," Harry said. "That isn't an answer. It's the only true one I have." Harry stopped at the edge of the water and watched the giant squid trace a lazy ring across the surface. "You want to know how I'm strong? I understand why it's the only thing you've ever actually wanted, to be strong enough that nothing can touch you. But I'll tell you something for free, Riddle, and you won't like it, and it's still true." He turned. "Most of what you think strength is, isn't. The water wasn't strength. The strength was being willing to stand between that thing and a girl I had no reason to save. The power's just the tool, the willingness is the thing, and you've spent so long making yourself untouchable that you've never once been willing to stand in front of anyone, and that, not the spell work, is why you'll never be able to do what I did, no matter how many books you read." It was a deliberate move. Harry had planned this conversation the way he planned all of them now, and the goal of it was specific: to plant in the soil of Riddle's relentless hunger for power a single seed of a different idea, that the kind of strength Riddle craved was not the only kind and not the highest kind, and that the road he was on led somewhere smaller than he thought. It was the redemption thesis tested in miniature. And Harry watched Riddle receive it with the cold attention he gave everything, and could not tell, could never tell, whether any of it landed, or whether the boy simply filed it as one more data point about the strange and powerful person he had decided to acquire. "That," Riddle said at last, "is a beautiful sentiment, the kind losers tell themselves." But there was no heat in it, and he was looking at the water and not at Harry, and for just a moment the famous composure had a hairline crack in it, and through the crack Harry saw something that might have been doubt, or might have been only the reflection of the squid, and he could not be sure, and the not being sure was the whole of his torment. The friendship, if that was the word, and Harry was never sure it was, deepened through the autumn in the particular way that dangerous things deepen, which is quietly, and faster than anyone means them to. They fell into a rhythm. Most evenings found them in one of the unused classrooms on the 4th floor, a fire conjured in the cold grate, two of the most extraordinary minds in the castle taking some idea apart for the pleasure of seeing how it was made. Harry had not meant to enjoy it and could not stop. He fed Riddle problems, old ones from his own time, dressed as idle curiosities, the kind of question that has no clean answer, and watched the boy work them, and the watching taught him more about Tom Riddle than any amount of spying could have, because a man reveals himself most completely in how he thinks when he believes the thinking is play, and Harry used the rhythm. That was the part he held himself to, the discipline under the pleasure. Every conversation was also a campaign. He could not lecture Riddle out of the road he was walking. He had learned that in the library with the gift and the cold reading of it, but he could steer, a degree at a time, by choosing which ideas to hand the boy and which to let lie. So he handed him ideas about strength that was not domination, about power that did not have to be held down by force, about the men in Harry's own carefully fogged history who had been most feared and ended most alone. He never named Horcruxes. He never had to. He simply made the whole architecture of immortality through fear feel, in 100 small improvable ways, like a smaller and lonelier thing than Riddle had decided it was, and he watched to see whether any of it took. He could not tell whether any of it took. That was the maddening center of the whole enterprise. Riddle received every idea with the same flawless attention and gave nothing back that revealed which had landed and which he had merely filed. Some evenings Harry was certain he was reaching the boy. There would be a silence after something Harry said, a stillness that looked like a thought being genuinely turned over for the first time. In some evenings he was certain he was being managed exactly as expertly as Riddle managed everyone, that the warmth was a performance pitched precisely at the one audience clever enough to require a better performance. He never knew. He suspected he would never know until the very end, when the boy's nature was forced to declare itself, and the not knowing was the price of the closeness, and he paid it. "You ask strange questions," Riddle said one night, watching the fire Harry had conjured. "Not the questions a schoolboy asks, the questions of someone who has needed the answers, who taught you to think like this, Black, not Ilvermorny. No school teaches a person to weigh a man's strength against his loneliness as though he has stood at the deathbed of someone who had both. Life taught me," Harry said. "It's a harder school than any of them. The fees are appalling." Riddle smiled at that, the almost real smile, the one that arrived without quite the usual half-second delay. "I find I believe you. I find I believe very little of what you tell me about yourself, and all of what you tell me about the world, which is a strange way to trust a person and yet seems to be the way I have come to trust you." He turned from the fire, and his eyes in the low light were for a moment simply a clever, lonely boy's eyes. "I have never had this, a conversation I did not have to win. I keep waiting to discover what it costs." "Maybe it doesn't cost anything," Harry said. "Maybe that's the part you can't make yourself believe. Maybe," Riddle looked back at the flames, "or maybe you are the most expensive thing that has ever happened to me, and I will only learn the price when the bill comes due." He said it lightly, almost fondly, and it was the most honest and the most chilling thing he had said all evening, because it was both a confession of how much the friendship had come to mean to him, and a warning that some part of him was still, even now, even here, watching the door, and Harry sat in the warmth of a fire he had made for a boy he had crossed time to stop, and understood that this, the closeness itself, was the most dangerous ground he had ever chosen to stand on. And that he would go on choosing it every evening, for as long as there was a chance it led somewhere other than the dark. There was a thing Harry had to do before any of the rest of it mattered, and the lake walks had taught him the shape of why. Riddle's hunger had a direction. Harry had felt it sharpen across their conversations, week by week. The questions about the water, about power, about strength, were not idle, they were a search, and the thing the search was circling was always the same. Riddle wanted to be untouchable, not powerful in the ordinary way. The boy was already the most powerful student in the school, and it bored him. He wanted to be beyond reach, beyond harm, beyond, Harry understood with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the histories and everything to do with the look on the boy's face when he said, "I will never be powerless again," beyond death. And there was exactly one man in the castle who held the piece of knowledge that turned that wish into a method, and his name was Horace Slughorn, and he did not yet know what he was carrying. In the telling, Harry knew it had happened in the spring. Riddle, having read everything the library permitted, and a good deal it did not, had come to the edge of a question he could not answer alone: what happens to a soul that has been deliberately split? And he had taken that question to the one teacher vain enough and fond enough to answer it. Slughorn had told him about Horcruxes, had named the thing, explained the principle, confirmed it could be done. Had handed a clever, hungry, half-orphaned boy the exact blueprint of his own damnation over a glass of after-dinner wine, and had spent the rest of his life so ashamed of it that he hid the memory rather than face what his vanity had set loose. Harry was going to get to Slughorn first. He was going to poison the well before Riddle drank from it. It was delicate work, the most delicate he had attempted, because he could not simply tell Slughorn the truth. A student is going to ask you how to split a soul, and you must refuse him, without raising exactly the questions about Harry that he could least afford. He had to do it sideways. He had to make Horace Slughorn afraid of a piece of knowledge before the question that wanted it was ever asked, and he had to do it so that, when Riddle came calling in the spring with that beautiful hungry smile, the well was already dry and the door already shut. He chose a potions evening, when Slughorn was mellow with his own crystallized pineapple and inclined to talk, and he steered the conversation the way he had learned to steer everything now, an inch at a time. "Professor," Harry said, idly polishing a cauldron he did not need to polish, "can I ask you something that's been bothering me, something I read before I came here in a book I wish I hadn't?" "Of course, my boy, of course." Slughorn beamed, delighted to be consulted. "Knowledge is never the thing to fear, only ignorance. That's the thing, though." Harry let his voice drop, let it go troubled, let himself look like a boy carrying something heavy. "I'm not sure that's true anymore. There's a kind of magic," the book only touched it, and I put it down and couldn't sleep, about splitting the soul, tearing a piece off and hiding it to keep yourself from dying. He watched Slughorn's genial face go very slightly still, the way a man's face goes still when you have named a thing he had hoped never to discuss. And the book said it could be done, but it didn't say what it does to you, to the part that's left, and I can't stop thinking, Professor, what would be left of a person who did that? Who could tear off a piece of his own soul and feel fine about it? You'd have to already be broken, wouldn't you, to manage it at all? And then you'd be more broken after. It seemed to me like the worst thing a person could do to himself, dressed up as the cleverest, and I wondered if anyone really understands what it costs. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, and Harry knew it, and he hated that he had become a person who could build such things. He had asked Slughorn nothing. He had instead handed the man a fully formed horror, the splitting of the soul as self-mutilation, as the act of an already broken creature, as the worst thing dressed as the cleverest, and he had attached to it the image of a student lying awake, troubled, made smaller by the mere knowledge. He had made Horace Slughorn feel, in advance, the shame the man would otherwise only feel in hindsight. He had inoculated him. Slughorn set down his glass. The geniality had drained out of him entirely, and what was left was an older, graver, more frightened man than the one who collected promising students like Brandy. Where, Slughorn said slowly, did you read such a book, Mr. Black? Somewhere far away, Harry said. A long time ago. I'm sorry, Professor, I shouldn't have brought it up. It's only that you're the one teacher here I'd trust with a thing that dark. I knew you wouldn't, I don't know, make it sound exciting. Some people would. Some people would hear don't die and stop listening before the part about what it does to your soul. He let the boy's troubled honesty hang there. You won't, though. You'd tell anyone who asked you that it's the worst idea in the world, wouldn't you? And he watched the trap close, gently, with the man's own hand on the spring, because Harry had not lectured Slughorn. He had flattered him into a position, had told him that he, Horace Slughorn, was the kind of wise and decent man who would warn a student off such a thing, who would never make it sound exciting, and now Slughorn, who loved nothing in the world so much as being thought well of, would sooner cut off his own hand than disappoint that picture of himself. Harry had not told him to refuse Riddle. He had made refusing Riddle the only way Slughorn could remain the man Harry had told him he was. I would, Slughorn said, and his voice had iron in it Harry had never heard there. I would tell them it is an abomination, my boy, and I would tell them never to speak of it again, and I would mean every word. You were right to put the book down. He reached out and gripped Harry's shoulder, and his hand was trembling slightly. And you were right to bring it to me. There is a darkness in our world, Mr. Black, that gifted young people are especially prone to mistake for ambition. I have seen it before. I will be watching for it now. Thank you for trusting me with it. Of course, Professor, Harry said, and felt the well go dry, and felt no triumph at all, only the grim satisfaction of a man who has sealed one of 100 doors that all lead to the same fire. It would not be enough on its own, he knew that. A boy as relentless as Tom Riddle, denied by Slughorn, would simply look elsewhere, in darker books, in the gaunt inheritance, in the old forbidden places that did not require a teacher's permission. Harry had not closed the road to immortality. He had only removed its easiest mile, the warm and well-lit mile that ran through a vain man's after-dinner indulgence. But every mile he could close was a mile of time bought, and time was the only currency that mattered now, and he had just bought a great deal of it by spending an evening making a kind man afraid of a thing he should always have feared. He left the potions classroom with the taste of his own cleverness sour in his mouth, and thought not for the first time that the worst thing the war had done to him was teach him to do this, to reach into people and rearrange them, gently, for their own good and his purposes, exactly the way Tom Riddle did, the only difference being the direction he turned them. He had told Riddle that kindness used as a weapon was still kindness. He was less sure of it tonight than he had been in the dungeon. He had just used a man's vanity to save the man's soul, and it had worked, and he did not feel clean. The Knights of Walpurgis tested him within the week, because of course they did. Riddle had a following, the early core of it, Abraxas Malfoy with his pale arrogance, the Lestrange boy with his cruelty worn openly, Avery and Knott and Rosier, the sons of the old families who had attached themselves to the most brilliant boy in the school and basked in the reflected importance of it. They did not like Harry. Harry was an interloper, a nobody from nowhere, an American with no name worth knowing who had somehow captured the singular attention they all competed for, and they wanted him put back in his place. They caught him alone in a dungeon corridor, the 5 of them, in the way that boys who have learned cruelty from cruel fathers always think is clever, and Abraxas Malfoy did the talking because Abraxas Malfoy always did the talking. Black, Malfoy said, drawling the name into an insult. We've been wondering about you, about what exactly you are to Tom. He doesn't waste his time on people without a reason, and we can't work out your reason, and that makes us nervous, you understand. We like to know who we're standing next to. His wand was not out, but the others' hands were near theirs, and the corridor was empty, and the message was clear. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us where you really come from and what you really want, and you're going to do it now, while we're asking nicely. Harry looked at the 5 of them, these boys who would grow into the first Death Eaters, who would one day kneel and take a mark and hunt his parents and grandparents and friends across a country in flames, and felt nothing at all except a vast, cold patience. "You're nervous standing next to me," he said. "Good instinct, keep it." And then he showed them, because words were wasted on the sons of cruel men and a demonstration was not, why Tom Riddle had decided he was necessary. Malfoy's wand came up first, which was his mistake because it meant Harry knew where to look. Harry did not draw. That was the part they would talk about afterward, in the low, frightened voices boys use when something has rearranged their understanding of the world, that he did not even draw his wand. Malfoy's curse left the boy's wand and Harry stepped inside it, simply moved, the way a man who has dodged killing curses moves around a schoolboy's hex, and caught Malfoy's wrist and turned it, and the curse went into the ceiling and brought down a shower of stone dust. And then Harry had the wand out of Malfoy's hand and Malfoy's back against the wall, and the 4 others frozen with their own wands half raised, and the absolute certainty in the air that if any of them finished the motion, they would deeply regret it. "Here's what I am to Tom," Harry said conversationally, not raising his voice, holding Malfoy's wand loosely in 2 fingers like something he might return or might snap. "I'm the one person in this castle he can't fright, can't read, and can't do without, that's all. You don't need to understand it. You need to never do this again." He let go of Malfoy and stepped back and held out the wand, hilt first, an offer and a humiliation in one. "Take your wand, Abraxas. And the next time you're nervous standing next to someone, try just being polite. It's astonishing how often it works better than 5 against 1. Malfoy took the wand. His hand shook, and he hated that it shook, and he hated Harry for seeing it. The 5 of them retreated up the corridor in a silence thick enough to cut, and Harry let them go, because the point had been made and dead schoolboys were not on his agenda, and as they reached the stair, Harry saw the thing he had been waiting for. Tom Riddle standing at the top of it, who had been there the whole time, who had watched his knights test the interloper and watched the interloper take them apart without drawing breath, and who was looking at Harry now with an expression that had moved past hunger into something closer to wonder. "You could have hurt them," Riddle said when the others had gone. "Badly, you chose not to. They're boys," Harry said. "Stupid, cruel, frightened boys who learned it from home. Hurting them wouldn't teach them anything except that I'm someone to be hurt back. I'd rather they learned the other thing." "What other thing?" "That they didn't have to be afraid of me to begin with." Harry held Riddle's eyes. "I keep trying to show you the same thing, Tom. You just keep deciding it's a trick." Riddle was quiet for a long moment. He came down the stairs slowly and stopped a pace away, and there was something in his face Harry had never seen there before, not the mask, not the cold engine beneath it, but a third thing, raw and unfinished, that looked almost like grief for something he had never had. "When I was younger," Riddle said, and his voice was very even, the way it got when the thing underneath was not even at all, "the other children at the place I grew up were afraid of me. I made them afraid because being feared was the only power available to a boy with nothing. And I learned that fear works. It is reliable. It does not lie to you the way affection does. A frightened person will do what you want, and you never have to wonder whether they mean it." He looked at Harry. "You took 5 boys apart without hurting one of them, and now they will be more loyal to me and more wary of crossing you than any beating could have made them. You used kindness as a weapon, and it was more effective than my cruelty. I have been trying for a week to work out how you did the water. I think this is the more important question. How is the kindness stronger? It makes no sense. It should be a weakness. In my experience, it has always been a weakness." And there it was, the closest Tom Riddle had ever come to asking for help, dressed as a strategic inquiry, offered to the one person he had decided was worth asking. Harry stood in the dungeon corridor with the stone dust still settling, and understood that he was being handed the exact opening he had crossed 50 years to find. A crack in the fortress, a genuine question, a hungry mind reaching, for one unguarded moment, toward the possibility that everything it had built its life upon might be wrong. This was the hinge. Harry felt the whole weight of the mission swing onto this single conversation, and he chose his words with the care of a man diffusing something that could take his hands off. "It's not stronger because it's nice," Harry said. "Forget nice. Nice is nothing. It's stronger because it's the only kind of power that doesn't cost you everything to hold. Fear works, you're right, it's reliable, it does what you want, but it has to be maintained. Every frightened person is a spring under tension, and the moment you look away, the moment you're weak, the moment something stronger comes along, they're gone, and worse than gone, they're against you, because fear breeds nothing but the wish to be free of it. You'll spend your whole life holding all those springs down, and the day you can't, they'll bury you." Harry stepped closer. "Loyalty that isn't fear doesn't need holding, it holds itself. Those boys upstairs, if I'd beaten them, I'd have to watch them forever. Because I didn't, I never have to think about them again. That's the difference, Tom. Fear is a thing you carry, the other thing carries you. And a man who builds his whole power on fear is building a house he has to hold up with his own arms until the day they give out, and they always give out." He was not only talking about schoolboys, and Riddle knew it, and the knowing moved across the boy's face like weather. He was describing, in the language of a dungeon scuffle, the exact architecture of the empire Tom Riddle would one day build, an empire of terror held up by a single set of arms, an immortality purchased with murder, a power so total and so brittle that in the end, a teenager with a borrowed wand and a phoenix had brought the whole of it down. Harry was telling Voldemort how Voldemort dies 50 years early to the boy's own face, and the boy could not possibly understand the literal truth of it and was nonetheless hearing something, some echo of his own future ringing up through the words, and for one long suspended moment in the dust and the dim light, Tom Riddle looked genuinely, nakedly uncertain. "No one has ever spoken to me the way you do," Riddle said, finally, very quietly, "as though I might be wrong. Everyone else either fears me or wants something from me. You do neither. I have spent a fortnight trying to decide whether that makes you the most dangerous person I have ever met or the only friend I have ever had, and I find—" He stopped. The mask twitched, trying to reassemble itself, and for once failing. "I find I cannot tell, and I am never unable to tell." It was the most honest thing he had ever said, and it undid Harry more than any threat could have, because it was true, and because the loneliness in it was real, and because Harry could see, with sudden devastating clarity, the whole tragedy laid bare. That Tom Riddle had been reaching his entire life for the one thing that might have saved him, someone who neither feared him nor wanted to use him, and had never found it until the person who finally offered it was the one person in the world who had come specifically to end him. "Maybe I'm both," Harry said, and his voice was rougher than he meant it to be. "Maybe the most dangerous person you've ever met and the only friend you've ever had are the same person. It happens more than you'd think." He held the boy's uncertain gaze and felt the mission and the affection war in him and refused to let either win the moment. "The question isn't what I am, Tom. You'll drive yourself mad on that one. The question is what you do with the fact that for once in your life, someone's standing in front of you who isn't afraid of you and isn't trying to take anything from you. You can keep looking for the hook, or you can do the thing you've never once done and just let it be real, see what happens. I don't think it'll be what you're afraid of." For one heartbeat, one single, suspended, knife-edge heartbeat, Harry saw the fortress gate stand open, saw the starving boy behind the cold prince look out and almost step through, saw the entire war hang on a thread thin enough to break with a breath. And then from somewhere above them in the castle, a bell rang for the evening meal and the spell broke and Tom Riddle's face closed like a book, and the prince came back, smooth and beautiful and impenetrable, and the moment was gone as though it had never been. "You're late for dinner," Riddle said pleasantly, the warmth back in place, the crack mortared over. "Septimus Weasley will be wondering where his American has got to." He turned to go and paused and did not look back and said, in a voice so low Harry almost missed it, "I will think about what you said. I don't promise more than that, but I will think about it." And then he was gone up the stairs, and Harry stood alone in the dungeon with the stone dust and the dim light and the unbearable knowledge that he had come closer in that corridor to saving Tom Riddle than anyone ever had or ever would, and that he still could not tell whether close was going to be close enough, or whether the bell had just rung out the last best chance the world would ever get. He had wanted to get into Riddle's orbit. He was in it now, all the way in, close enough to touch the thing at the center, close enough to be burned by it. And the closer he got, the clearer it became that the question he had crossed 50 years to answer, redeem him or end him, was not going to be answered by Harry at all. It was going to be answered by Tom. And Tom had just said, "I will think about it," which was either the most hopeful thing Harry had heard since he died, or the cruelest, and he would not know which until it was far too late to choose again. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, the Horcrux forming a creature denied its food does not stop being hungry, it changes how it hunts. Harry had saved Myrtle Warren and dried Slughorn's well, and he had known, even as he did both, that he was not solving the problem so much as forcing it to take a new shape, and the new shape revealed itself slowly over the weeks that followed, in the way Tom Riddle's attention turned. The boy stopped asking about the water. He stopped, almost entirely, the long, searching conversations by the lake. He was as warm as ever in public and as present as ever at Harry's side, but underneath the warmth Harry felt the engine turn towards something new, something private, something it had decided not to share even with the one person it had nearly trusted. And a Tom Riddle keeping a secret from Harry was a far more dangerous thing than a Tom Riddle hunting him, because it meant the boy had stopped reaching outward and started building inward. And the thing he was building was the one Harry had crossed 50 years to prevent. The basilisk had gone quiet. The chamber stayed shut after the night in the bathroom. The writing on the wall was scrubbed away and not renewed. The cat stopped dying. To the castle it looked as though the danger had passed, as though some prank or some passing madness had run its course, and the prefects relaxed and the little ones were allowed back to the greenhouses alone. Harry knew better. The silence was not retreat. It was reconsideration. Riddle had reached for the simplest version of the thing he wanted, a death in a bathroom, a soul torn over a victim chosen for being friendless, and Harry had taken it from him, and a lesser boy would have tried again the same way, and a greater one would have asked why it had failed. Riddle was asking why. and the answer he was circling, Harry feared, was Harry. He found the first hard evidence in the library, where he found most things, in the ledger, the restricted section kept of what had been signed out. He had befriended the timid witch who minded the desk in the slow, careful way he befriended everyone now, and she let him see the ledger without quite knowing she had let him, and the names told a story. Riddle had stopped checking out the defensive texts he had pretended to want. He was signing out genealogies now, histories of the old pureblood lines. A crumbling treatise on the founding families and their seats and their inheritances, and twice a banned and water-damaged volume on the magical properties of bloodline and birthright that the ministry had tried for a century to burn out of existence. He's looking for his family, Harry understood, sitting in the cold light of the library with the ledger open before him. He's looking for the Gaunts. It was the road Harry had feared most, because it was the road that did not run through anyone Harry could protect or any well he could poison. In the telling Harry knew, Tom Riddle had eventually traced his mother's line to the Gaunts, the last withered branch of Salazar Slytherin's blood, sunk into madness and squalor in a hovel called Little Hangleton, and had gone there, and had found a murderous uncle and a muggle father and a ring that held a stone older than the school, and had committed the murders that tore his soul a second and a third time, and had taken the ring as a trophy and a horcrux. That road did not begin in a bathroom. It began in a library with a boy reading genealogies, and it ended with 3 dead riddles in a manor house and a soul torn past any mending. And Harry was watching the boy take the first steps down it, in real ink, in a ledger no one else thought to read. He could not poison Little Hangleton. He could not befriend a dead muggle or warn a mad Gaunt who would not believe a word he said. The intervention that had worked for Myrtle, get the victim out of the way, did not scale to a manor full of people 50 miles from the school, people Harry could not reach without revealing exactly how much he knew. The board had changed. Riddle had moved the game to a square Harry could not easily cover, and Harry sat in the library and made himself look at the new geometry of it without flinching, the way he had made himself look at everything since the green light. There was only one piece he could move, and it was the same piece it had always been, the boy himself. If Harry could not close the road, he had to turn the traveler off it. He had to reach Tom Riddle before the summer, before the boy went looking for the Gaunts, and he had to give him a reason not to go, or he had to be certain, finally and beyond doubt, that no reason would ever be enough, and do the other thing. The test he had run in the library months ago had been gentle. The one he was about to run would not be. He watched Riddle through December, and what he watched was a boy disappearing into himself by degrees. The change was subtle and total. To the castle, Tom Riddle was exactly what he had always been, the perfect prefect, the favorite, the warm and brilliant center of every room he entered. But Harry, who now knew the boy's true face well enough to measure the mask against it, saw the warmth going thin from the inside, like ice over deep water in a hard freeze. The evening conversations grew rarer. When they happened, Riddle's attention was elsewhere, turned inward toward whatever he was building in the private dark behind his eyes, and the questions he asked Harry had changed their character, no longer the open play of 2 minds enjoying themselves, but probes, narrow and purposeful, circling always back to the same buried subject, survival, permanence, what it would take to make a thing that could not be ended. Suppose, Riddle said once, not looking up from a book on the old bloodlines, that a man wished to ensure he could never be wholly destroyed, not protected, destroyed. Suppose the worst happened, the very worst, his body killed outright. Is there magic that would let some part of him remain, persist, wait? He asked it as though it were a chess problem, an abstraction, and Harry, who knew it was no abstraction at all, who knew it was a boy circling the exact edge of the cliff he meant to throw himself off, answered very carefully. There's magic that promises that, Harry said. There's always magic that promises that. It's the oldest promise there is and the oldest lie. Every version of it costs more than it gives. The thing that comes back is never the thing that died. It's a piece, a remnant, less each time. You don't get to persist, Tom. You get to leave behind something that used to be you, getting smaller until there's nothing left worth the name. He held the boy's gaze. Whoever's selling it to you in that book is selling you a grave you have to dig yourself. No one is selling me anything, Riddle said and smiled and closed the book, and the conversation was over, but Harry had seen the flicker of irritation cross the perfect face, the small cold anger of a man who has been told that the thing he wants cannot be had, and he understood that he had not turned the boy from anything. He had only confirmed that the boy was already on the road and had stopped pretending, even to himself, that he was anywhere else. Harry took it to Dumbledore because he had promised himself he would not carry the whole weight alone, and because a second pair of eyes on a thing like this was worth more than pride. They met in the Transfiguration office in the early dark of a December evening, and Harry laid out what he had seen, the disappearing warmth, the narrowing questions, the genealogies, the banned book on bloodline that had gone out of the restricted section under a name that was not Riddle's. He's looking for a way not to die, Harry said. He's found the edge of it in the old books, and he's working out how to cross it. I can't tell you how I know what's on the other side of that edge, Professor, but I know, and it's the worst thing a person can do to himself, and he's going to do it within months unless something stops him. The boy you've been watching for me, he's running out of the part of himself that could still be reached. The window's closing. I can feel it closing." Dumbledore was quiet for a long while, his long fingers steepled, the firelight moving in his auburn beard. "I have been watching him," he said at last, "as I promised, and I have seen what you described, the cooling, the withdrawal. I had told myself it was the ordinary darkness of a clever, unhappy adolescent, the kind that passes." He sighed, and for a moment looked every one of his years. "But it does not have the shape of a thing that passes. It has the shape of a thing that is deepening toward a decision. You are right to be afraid of the window closing, Harry. I am afraid of it too now, which I was not before you came, and I am not certain whether to thank you for the sight or curse you for it." "Both," Harry said. "That's usually the right answer with me." The old wizard's mouth twitched, but the gravity did not leave his eyes. "Then let us agree on this. I will watch him by day in the open, where a teacher's eyes can go. You will watch him by night and in the hidden places where they cannot. And the moment either of us sees him reach for the edge in earnest, the moment the thing stops being books and questions and becomes an act, we move together without waiting for permission or proof. I have spent too much of my life waiting for proof of things I already knew. I will not do it with this." He looked at Harry, and the kindness in his face was edged now with something harder, the first true alliance between them. "You came to me with a warning I did not want to believe. I believe it now. Whatever that boy is becoming, he will not become it unwatched. You have my word." Harry walked back through the cold castle, that night lighter for having shared the weight and heavier for having confirmed it, and somewhere below him Tom Riddle bent over a book about the price of not dying, and the window between them, the narrow span in which a frightened, brilliant boy might still have been turned toward the light, went on, quietly, inexorably, closing. He almost ran out of time before he ever reached the room of hidden things, because 3 nights before the holidays began, the temperature in the castle dropped again. Harry felt it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm, a wrongness in the air of the dungeons that had nothing to do with December, and he followed it the way he had followed the cold to the bathroom, because he had learned that when the castle went cold around Tom Riddle, it meant the boy was about to do something that could not be undone. It led him down past the Slytherin corridors to a disused chamber behind the potion stores that no student had reason to enter, and the door was sealed with a working Harry had to break with both hands and a word that left him breathing hard, and when it gave he stepped into something he had hoped never to witness directly in his life. Riddle had begun. The room was lit by no fire and yet not dark, lit instead by the wrong kind of light, a thin greenish radiance that seemed to leak from the air itself. And at the center of it Tom Riddle knelt over a chalked diagram that hurt to look at, not because it was complex, but because the angles of it were wrong, the way the angles of the killing curse had been wrong in the half-second before Harry died, geometry that did not belong in a world built for human eyes. In the boy's hands was a small black book, an ordinary diary, its pages open and blank, and on the floor beside the diagram, bound and silent and wide-eyed with a terror that had been spell-frozen into stillness, was a third-year Hufflepuff that Harry recognized, a boy named Benji, small for his age, who had the bad luck to wander the dungeons after curfew, and the worse luck to be found by the one person in the castle who had a use for a friendless child no one would miss before morning. And the air above the diagram was beginning to fold. Harry had seen soul magic only once, from the inside, in the instant of his own death, and he had thought he would never have the stomach to see it from the outside. He saw it now. The folding in the air was the soul itself, Riddle's soul, drawn up out of the boy by the working and held suspended over the diagram like a sheet of dark water standing on its edge against gravity, and Harry understood, with a horror that went deeper than fear, what the working was for. It was not the murder that tore the soul. The murder was only the blade. This, the diagram, the diary, the green wrong light, was the binding, the part that took the piece the murder would tear loose and welded it into the waiting book, so that the death and the splitting and the anchoring would happen in a single seamless act, and a 16-year-old boy would walk out of this room immortal, and a Hufflepuff named Benji would never walk out at all. Riddle had not heard the door. He was deep in the working, his lips moving, his wand raised over the frozen child, and the folded sheet of his own soul trembled above him waiting to be cut. Harry had perhaps 2 seconds, and for the second time since 1943, his body decided before his mind could vote. He did not attack Riddle. He could not. A curse thrown into a soul binding at the moment of the split might do anything, might tear the boy's soul wholly loose, might kill the child, might do worse things, the laws of which Harry did not know and did not want to learn. So he did the only thing the geometry allowed. He broke the diagram. He threw himself across the room and drove his heel through the chalked lines, scattering them, shattering the wrongness of the angles, and the effect was instantaneous and violent. Folded sheet of soul above the diagram, suddenly unanchored with nowhere to go and nothing to bind it, snapped back into Tom Riddle like a struck whip, and the boy screamed, a sound Harry had never heard him make, would never have believed he could make, A raw animal sound of a soul slammed back into a body that had been open to release it, and the green light went out all at once, and the diary fell from his hands, and the frozen Hufflepuff collapsed as the spell holding him broke, gasping, alive. For a moment there was only darkness and the sound of two boys breathing hard. Then Harry's wand was alight, and he had Benji behind him, and Riddle was on his knees in the scattered chalk with his face gone gray and his composure utterly gone, staring at Harry with an expression that was, for the first and only time, pure undisguised hatred. "You broke it," Riddle whispered. "Do you have any idea, do you have the faintest idea what you have just done to me?" He pressed a hand to his chest as though something there had been wrenched, which it had. "It was open, I had it open, and you slammed it shut while my soul was still." He could not finish. His hand shook against his ribs. "It feels like you've broken something that won't ever set right. What did you do?" "I stopped you," Harry said, and his voice did not shake though the rest of him wanted to, because what he had seen would stay behind his eyes for the rest of whatever life he had left. "I stopped you from murdering a child, and I stopped you from doing the thing to your own soul that you can't undo. That scream, that's your soul telling you the truth your head won't hear, Tom. It doesn't want to be torn. Nothing whole does. You felt it. For 1 second before you brick it back over, you felt what you're actually doing to yourself. I felt you ruin a year of work," Riddle hissed, dragging himself upright, and the hatred in him was a living thing now. "Get the child out. Get him out before I decide that 2 deaths tonight are no worse than 1. It was not a bluff, and they both knew it, and Harry got the gasping Hufflepuff up and moving and out the broken door, and pressed the boy's memory of the green light gently into fog with a touch and a word, a kindness and a necessity both, and sent him stumbling up toward the light of the inhabited castle, alive, unmurdered, the second child Harry had pulled out of Tom Riddle's hands. Then he turned back, because he could not leave it there, because he had seen something in that scream he could not unsee. Riddle was standing among the ruins of his working, picking up the fallen diary with hands that still trembled, and the look he turned on Harry was equal parts loathing and something else, something that flickered underneath the loathing and would not quite die. "It hurt," Harry said quietly, splitting it. "It hurt more than anything has ever hurt you, and you've been hurt your whole life, so that's saying something. You're standing there telling yourself it was worth it, that the pain is the price of greatness, that you'll do it again properly next time. But I saw your face, Tom. For 1 second, when your soul snapped back, you weren't grateful and you weren't hungry. You were afraid, because some part of you, the part you've spent 16 years burying, knows that what you're about to do to yourself is the worst thing anyone has ever done to you, and this time you're the one doing it." Harry held his eyes. "You don't have to. That's the whole thing I keep trying to tell you. The hole you're trying to fill by tearing yourself apart, it doesn't get filled this way. It just gets bigger. You'll spend the rest of forever more empty than you are right now, and you are right now the emptiest person I have ever met, and I have met the man you become." And for just a moment, among the scattered chalk and the dying green light, with his soul still ringing from the slam, Tom Riddle looked at Harry Black with the diary clutched to his chest and said nothing at all, and the something underneath the hatred flickered higher, and Harry could not tell, would never be able to tell, whether it was the last ember of a boy who might still be reached, or only the reflection of Harry's own desperate hope thrown back at him off a surface as cold and final as ice. The not knowing was the whole of his torment, and it followed him out of that room and would follow him to the end. The broken binding changed the weather between them, and the days after it were the coldest Harry had known since he arrived. Riddle did not confront him about the ruined ritual, which was worse than if he had. He simply withdrew the last of the warmth, the way a tide goes out and leaves the rocks bare, and what remained underneath was a courtesy so flawless and so empty that it frightened Harry more than rage. The boy nodded to him in corridors. He passed the salt at supper, and his eyes, when they crossed Harry's, held nothing at all, no friendship, no fury, only the flat assessing patience of a creature that has identified an obstacle and is calculating without heat how it will be removed. Harry tracked the consequences the way he tracked everything. The Hufflepuff Benji remembered nothing of the green light, the fog it held, and the boy went about his small life unmarked, alive, the second child Harry had pulled out of Riddle's hands. But the chamber rumors had curdled again in the wake of it, a frightened third year, a cat found stiff outside the kitchens, the word air loose once more in the lower corridors, and Harry understood that Riddle, denied his clean private murder, was circling back toward the louder and cruder weapon he had used before, and that this time there was a name being ready to carry the blame. He heard it in a stairwell, 2 prefects talking low, that the great oaf Hagrid kept things in the dungeons, that everyone knew that it stood to reason. The frame was being built around the gentle boy exactly as Harry knew it must be, and Harry moved quietly to put a brick of doubt into every wall of it, a word to Dumbledore, a question planted in the right ear, a careful seeding of the idea that the simplest suspect is rarely the true one. He could not yet prove Hagrid innocent. He could make the castle slower to believe him guilty, and slowness was time, and time was everything. But the soul binding had taught Harry the thing he had been refusing to fully accept, and he made himself accept it now. He had been telling himself he had weeks, that the window was closing but still open, that there was time yet to reach the boy by gentler means. The binding had ended that comfort. He had seen Riddle kneeling over a chalk diagram with a child bound at his feet and his own soul standing on its edge in the air, ready to be cut, and a person who has come that close to the act does not retreat back into the realm of conversation and lake walks. He commits. He finds another diagram, another child, another night, and the next time there will be no cold draft to lead a stranger to the door in time. The gentle road had had a deadline, and the deadline had just passed in a cellar behind the potion stores, and Harry had broken one ritual, but he could not stand guard over every disused room in a castle full of them, which meant he had to force it. He had to make the confrontation happen on his ground and on his timing rather than wait for Riddle to choose a night Harry could not predict, because the boy who waited for the enemy to move first had already lost, and Harry had not survived one war by waiting. He chose the holidays. The castle would empty, the witnesses would scatter. There would be a span of quiet days in which two people could have the conversation that decided everything without the whole school listening at the keyhole. He chose the room of hidden things because he knew it and knew Riddle had found it too, and because what he meant to say needed walls that would keep no record. And he chose, lying awake the night before the holidays began, to bring the whole truth with him, or as much of it as the moment demanded, because the time for gentle steering was over, and the only thing left that might turn Tom Riddle from the road was to show him, plainly and without mercy, exactly where the road ended. It was a gamble with the highest stakes he had ever played for, and he knew it might detonate in his face, and he had run out of safer moves to make. He had come 50 years to reach this boy. The reaching had failed by inches and kindness. What was left was the truth, and the truth was the most dangerous thing he owned, and he was going to spend it. He confronted Riddle on a night when the castle was emptying for the holidays, in the room of hidden things, because Harry knew the room and knew Riddle had found it too. They had circled each other near its door enough times for Harry to be sure, and because what he meant to say needed walls that would keep no record. Riddle was already there when Harry came in, standing among the mountains of forgotten junk with a small object in his hands that he pocketed too smoothly when the door opened, and his face when he saw Harry was not warm and was not cold but was, for once, simply tired, the face of a boy who has been carrying something alone and is not entirely sorry to be interrupted. "You followed me," Riddle said. "Yes, you've been reading the library ledger." It was not a question. Riddle's mouth curved without humor. "Of course you have. I should have signed out under another name. I keep forgetting that the ordinary precautions don't work on you. You see the things between the things." He set down whatever he had been examining and turned to face Harry fully among the towers of lost and broken objects in the dim enchanted light. "So, you know what I've been looking for. Say it then, since you've come all this way to say something." "You're looking for your family," Harry said. "The Gaunts. Your mother's people. You've traced the line and you've found where it ends, and you're going to go there this summer, the first chance you get, because you've spent your whole life being a nobody from an orphanage, and you've finally found out you're the heir of Salazar Slytherin, and you think that's going to be the thing that fills the hole." He kept his voice level. "And I'm here to tell you it won't. I'm here to tell you exactly what you'll find when you get there, because I know, and I need you to hear it before you go." Riddle went very still. "You'll find a hovel," Harry said. "Not a seat, not a legacy. A filthy shack with a snake nailed to the door and a madman inside it who hisses at strangers and has nothing, no money, no land, no power, nothing but the name and a ring he can't sell and a hatred of the whole world that has eaten him down to the bone. That's what's left of Slytherin's line, Tom. That's your inheritance, not glory. A cautionary tale. A man who had the same blood you're so hungry for and let it rot him into an animal in a ditch." Harry took a step closer through the canyon of junk. "And you'll look at him and some part of you will recognize him, because he wanted exactly what you want, to be more than the world said he was, to never be powerless, to make everyone who looked down on him pay, and he wanted it so badly that it hollowed him out, and now he's nothing, and his blood is going to die in that shack with him. That's where the road you're on actually goes. I've seen the end of it. I'm trying to save you from walking the whole way there to find out." For a long moment Riddle said nothing, and the silence in the room of hidden things was total, and the junk towered around them like the strata of every forgotten thing in the world. "How," Riddle said at last, and his voice was soft and terrible and very precise, "do you know that there is a snake on the door?" The floor dropped out of the room. Harry had made a mistake. He knew it the instant the words left him. A snake nailed to the door, a detail he could only have from a memory he was not supposed to possess. A specific, checkable, impossible detail about a hovel 50 miles away that Tom Riddle himself had not yet seen. He had been so intent on the argument, on reaching the boy, on painting the end of the road vividly enough to turn him from it, that he had spent a piece of foreknowledge he could not account for, and Riddle, who missed nothing, who saw the things between the things, who had been waiting for months for exactly this slip, had caught it falling the way Harry had caught Edgar Bones, clean and certain and without effort. "You've never been there," Riddle went on, soft, stepping closer now, and the tiredness was gone from his face and the cold engine was bare and turning fast. You couldn't have. The gaunt hovel is unplottable. I've spent a month and 3 forbidden books learning even where it stands. No one living has described its door because no one living has been turned away from it but me, and I haven't gone yet. And yet you know there is a snake nailed to it. You know what I will find inside. You speak of the end of a road I have not walked, as though you have walked it yourself. He stopped an arm's length away and looked up into Harry's face with an expression of dawning, dreadful wonder. I have been trying for half a year to understand what you are. A spy, I thought, an agent of someone who fears me. But no spy knows the inside of an unplottable house. No agent describes a death that hasn't happened. There's only one explanation left, Black, and I have been refusing it because it is impossible, and I am done refusing impossible things. His voice dropped to almost nothing. You are not from here. Harry did not answer. There was no answer that helped. You are not from now, Riddle breathed, and the wonder in his face was building towards something that frightened Harry more than rage would have, a kind of rapture. You know things that haven't happened. You knew the bathroom before I struck. You knew the well before I went to Slughorn. Yes, I worked that out. I went to him in November and found him already terrified of the very question I meant to ask, terrified in advance as though someone had warned him, and I could not understand who until this moment. You have been ahead of me at every turn, not because you are clever, though you are, but because you have read the book already. His eyes were alight, fixed on Harry, hungry past anything Harry had yet seen in them. You've seen what becomes of me, haven't you? You know who I become. And there it was, the secret, the size of the future, lying open between them in the dim light among the mountains of forgotten things, and Tom Riddle looking at it not with the horror of a boy learning he is destined for darkness, but with the terrible joy of a starving thing that has just been told the feast is real, and the door is somewhere in this very room. Harry had run this moment 100 times in his head, and it had never gone like this, because in every version he had imagined Riddle's discovery as a catastrophe to be survived, and he saw now that it was something stranger and worse, an opportunity Riddle was already trying to seize. The boy did not care that his secret was out. He had skipped past that entirely. What he wanted, what was making his eyes shine in the dim light, was the one thing Harry had that no one else in any century could give him. You think I'll be afraid, Riddle said, reading Harry's face with that awful precision. You think I'll recoil from whatever it is I become. You've miscalculated, Black, for the first time. I am not afraid of my future. I have wanted to be great since I was old enough to want anything, and you have just confirmed that I succeed, that the orphan from Wolves, the nobody, the half-blood with the laughable name, becomes someone a man would cross time itself to study. Do you understand what you've told me? You've told me I win. He laughed, low and delighted and entirely without warmth. Why else would you be here? No one travels backward through 50 years to stop a failure. Came because I become so great that the only way to deal with me was to come back to before I existed. You are not my warning, Harry. You are my confirmation. It was, Harry thought, the most perfect inversion of the truth he had ever heard, and it was exactly the conclusion a soul already this far gone would draw, and that recognition was the answer he had crossed 50 years to find, arriving at last in the worst possible way. He had wanted to know whether Tom Riddle could be turned from the road. He had his answer now, written in the rapture on the boy's face. You could show this boy the snake on the door of his own ruin, and he would hear only that the door was worth finding. You could show him the hovel at the end of the road, and he would walk faster. You could come back through time at the cost of your own death and stand in front of him with the whole truth, and he would take the truth and use it as fuel. The fortress had no door after all. Or the door had been bricked up so long ago, by hands so much crueler than Harry's, that the boy behind it had died of the dark before Harry was ever born, and what stood in the room of hidden things wearing his face was already, in every way that mattered, the thing Harry had come to stop. Almost certain. And almost was the word that had bought Tom Riddle his life every time, and Harry, even now, even here, could not quite kill the last grain of doubt, because he had also seen, months ago in a library, a starving boy look out through a slot in a door, and a thing that is wholly dead does not look out. You're wrong about why I came, Harry said quietly. Am I? I didn't come because you win, Tom. I came because you lose. Harry held the shining, hungry eyes and made himself say it, all of it, because the gentle road was gone and only the true one was left. You don't become great, you become a horror. You take that name you found in the library and you bury it and you build a new one out of fear, and you murder your way across a country, and you tear your soul into pieces and hide them in objects because you're so terrified of dying that you'll mutilate yourself rather than face it, and it doesn't even work. You don't get to be a god, you get to be a thing that can't die and can't live, hiding in the woods, possessed by your own emptiness, and in the end you're killed by a boy with a borrowed wand who you've underestimated his whole life, exactly the way you're underestimating the one standing in front of you right now. He let that land. Everyone you ever frighten into following you abandons you or betrays you or dies for nothing. You die alone, hated, having accomplished the murder of thousands in the building of nothing. That's the future you're so hungry for. I've seen it. I lived in it. I crossed 50 years not to confirm your greatness, but to make sure that future never gets built, and I would rather it never get built by saving you than by anything else, but you are making that very, very hard. The rapture had flickered on Riddle's face, not at the horror Harry saw, but at one detail, the detail Riddle's mind had seized the way it seized everything useful. Pieces, Riddle said softly. I hide my soul in pieces, in objects. His eyes had gone distant, turning the idea over, and Harry felt the bottom drop out of the world a second time because he understood that he had just done the one thing Slughorn's silence had been meant to prevent. He had named the method. In his fury to show Riddle the end of the road, he had handed him the map of it. So it can be done. The soul can be divided and anchored, and the body that dies with one piece gone simply doesn't. That's how I survived the boy with the borrowed wand, isn't it? Not once, many times. You said pieces, plural, I make several. The hunger was back, vast and cold and almost serene now. You came to take that knowledge away from me. And instead you've confirmed it exists, told me it works, and told me it's the thing that makes me unkillable. Harry, and his voice was almost gentle, almost grateful. You may be the worst enemy I will ever have. You've also just given me the only thing I have ever truly wanted. I don't know whether to destroy you or thank you. Harry's mistake sat in the air between them, enormous and irreversible, and he made himself look at it without flinching because flinching had never once helped. He had come to dry the well and he had filled it. He had come to turn the boy from the road and he had paved it. Every intervention he had made saving Myrtle, warning Slughorn, even this confrontation meant to be the last best chance at mercy, had been read by Tom Riddle, processed, and turned to the boy's purpose, because that was what Tom Riddle did with everything. It was the whole of him. He was a machine for converting the world into his own ascent, and Harry had just fed the machine. There was a long silence in the room of hidden things. The forgotten objects loomed. And Harry understood that the test was over, that the question was answered, that the almost had finally fully closed, because a boy who could be handed the entire catalog of his own damnation and respond with gratitude was not a boy who could be saved by kindness or by truth or by anything Harry had brought across 50 years to offer him. The road to Tom Riddle's redemption, if it had ever existed, had not survived contact with Tom Riddle's nature, which meant the other branch, the one Harry had written on the burning parchment and hoped never to take, NIT, not on foreknowledge now. On the proof of a boy's own face lighting up at the news that he would tear his soul to pieces and murder thousands, on the proof of gratitude where there should have been horror. Harry had sworn he would not kill on foreknowledge alone, and he had kept the oath, and he had run every test, and the tests were finished, and the verdict was in, and it had cost him terribly to reach it honestly, and now he had to do the thing the verdict demanded. Tom, Harry said, and something in his voice made the boy go still, because it was not the voice of the friend from the lake walks or the strange American from the courtyard. It was a colder, older, final voice, the voice of a man who has finished deciding. I gave you every chance, I want you to know that. Whatever happens after tonight, I came back wanting to save you, and I tried, and you are my witness that I tried. Remember that I tried. Riddle's smile faded. For the first time looking at Harry's face, something in him understood that the conversation had changed its nature, that the strange ally who had spent half a year being unafraid of him had just become the most dangerous thing in the room for an entirely new reason, and the cold engine behind his eyes shifted from hunger to calculation, and his hand drifted slowly toward his wand. You're going to try to kill me, Riddle said with something almost like wonder. Here, now, you really are. I'm going to do what no one in my whole life was able to do in time, Harry said, and the air in the room of hidden things began, very slightly, to hum with the power he had spent 6 months hiding. I'm going to stop you before you start. I'm sorry, Tom, I truly am, but I have buried every person I ever loved because of what you become, and I will not bury them twice. The forgotten objects threw long shadows. Two of the most dangerous minds the world would ever make faced each other across an arm's length of charged and waiting air. And outside the room of hidden things, the castle slept on through the first night of the holidays, empty and innocent and entirely unaware that the whole of its future was about to be decided in a room that did not appear on any map. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The turning point. Riddle moved first, and Harry had known he would, because a boy who lived by never being powerless could not bear to let the other man choose the moment. The curse came fast and silent, and it was not a schoolboy's hex. Somewhere in the months of forbidden books, Riddle had learned things the curriculum did not teach, and the bolt that left his wand was a killing intent dressed in green-edged black, aimed not to wound but to end. Harry was already gone from where it struck. He had dueled men who made Tom Riddle look like the child he still partly was. He had dueled Voldemort himself, the finished article, red-eyed and immortal, and survived it. A 16-year-old prodigy, however gifted, was fighting a man who had graduated from a harder school, and the first 10 seconds of the duel told them both so. Harry did not throw a killing curse back. That was the thing Riddle could not understand and could not counter, and it unbalanced him more than any attack would have. Harry fought defensively, beautifully, economically, turned Riddle's curses into the towers of forgotten junk, which exploded and rained down splintered wood and broken glass, shielded what needed shielding and dodged what could be dodged, and gave ground in a slow, controlled spiral that always, Riddle began to realize too late, kept Harry between the boy and the door. He was not trying to kill Tom Riddle. He was trying to take him to disarm, to bind, to end the fight without ending the boy, because even now, even after the green light in the diary and the scream, Harry had not given up the last grain of his hope, and a bound Riddle could still be talked to and a dead one could not. "Why won't you fight me?" Riddle snarled, hurling a curse that brought a mountain of chairs down between them. "You could end this. You keep telling me you came to stop me, so stop me, Black, finish it, or admit that you can't." "I don't want to kill you," Harry said, and vanished a wave of broken glass an inch from his face, and answered with a binding that Riddle barely turned. "I have never wanted to kill you. That's the part you'll never understand, because nobody ever wanted anything for you that wasn't about themselves, and so you've decided wanting good things for someone is impossible, and it's made you the loneliest creature I've ever seen. I'm trying to save your life, you brilliant, broken idiot. Stop making me choose." And for a moment, 3 exchanges, 4 they fought, and it was, Harry would think afterward, the most terrible conversation of his life, because the duel was a conversation. 2 minds arguing in the only language Riddle fully trusted, force. And what Harry was saying in that language was, "I am stronger than you, and I am choosing not to destroy you," over and over. With every curse he turned aside instead of returning. And what Riddle was hearing, slowly, with rising fury, was that he had finally met someone more powerful than himself, and that person's response to having him at a disadvantage was mercy, which was the one thing Tom Riddle had no defense against, because he had never once in his life received it. It ended the way Harry meant it to end. He let Riddle overcommit, let the boy throw everything into a single overwhelming assault, the way the young and the proud always did when mercy enraged them, and he turned the whole of it, and in the half-second of Riddle's exhaustion Harry's binding took him at last, ropes of light winding the boy's arms to his sides and his wand spinning out of his hand to clatter among the wreckage. And then it was over, and Tom Riddle stood bound and disarmed and beaten in the ruins of the Room of Hidden Things. Breathing hard, and Harry stood untouched 10 feet away with the boy's life entirely in his hands. The silence rang. "There," Riddle said when he had breath. His voice was unsteady and his eyes were not. His eyes were fixed on Harry with a terrible clarity. "You've won, you have me, now do it. You came 50 years to do it. I'm bound, I'm wandless, I can't stop you." And the great horror before he's made, his mouth twisted. "Or can't you? Is the famous mercy going to fail you now, at the one moment it actually matters?" And there it was, the cheap victory, the clean kill. Harry stood in the wreckage with the most dangerous boy in the world bound and helpless before him, and the entire war behind his own eyes. Ron, Ginny, his mother and father whom this boy would murder in a cottage 40 years from now. The hall full of the dead, Hermione's wrecked arm and the green light he had stepped into, and every cell of his body that had survived that war screamed at him to finish it, that this was the moment, that no one would ever be more justified. That a single curse here saved a world. He raised his wand. Riddle watched it come up and did not flinch. Of course he did not flinch. He had decided long ago that flinching was weakness, and he met his own execution with the same composure he met everything, beautiful and cold and 16 years old, and Harry could not do it. He stood there with his wand level at a bound boy's heart and the whole war screaming behind his eyes, and he could not make his hand finish the motion, and it was not weakness, and it was not the famous mercy, and it was something colder and clearer than either. It was understanding. Because in the last second before the curse, Harry finally saw the thing he had been circling for half a year, the thing the tests and the conversations and the scream had all been spelling out, and he had been too close to read. That killing Tom Riddle here, now bound and helpless, did not actually stop Voldemort. It stopped a Voldemort. It removed one boy. But the thing that had made the boy, the orphanage that taught him fear, was the only safe power, the world that met a frightened child with cruelty until cruelty was all he understood. The hole that nobody had ever tried to fill with anything but more emptiness, that thing was still there, untouched, and it would go on making Tom Riddles out of frightened children for as long as the world worked the way it worked. Harry had come to kill a man. He was standing over the boy that man had been. And he understood at last with his wand at the boy's heart that the boy was not the disease, the boy was the symptom. And you do not cure a thing by killing its symptoms one at a time across 50 years. He lowered the wand. "No," Harry said. Riddle stared at him. For the first time since Harry had met him, the boy looked genuinely, completely lost. "No, I'm not going to kill you." Harry's voice was very quiet and very certain. "I worked it out just now with my wand at your chest, which is a poor time to work anything out, but it's the time I had. Killing you doesn't fix it. You're not the thing that's wrong, Tom. You're what the wrong thing does. Somebody made you the orphanage, the cruelty, the fear, 16 years of a world that showed you nothing but its teeth. And if I kill you here, I've murdered a 16-year-old to stop a future, and the machine that built you is still running, and I've become a man who kills children for what they might become, which is the exact thing you grow up to be." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't cross 50 years to win cheap. I crossed it to win right, and winning right doesn't mean killing the boy. It means killing the making of him. It means going back to the thing that tore the first piece of you loose and never letting it tear. That's the move, not your death, the unmaking of the road that leads to it. "You're insane," Riddle said, but there was no conviction in it, only a kind of vertigo, because Harry had refused the one ending Riddle understood and offered one he had no framework for at all. "You have me, you have everything, and you're going to throw it away on what? A theory, a sentiment." "On the truth," Harry said, "which I'll grant you has never done either of us much good." And he almost smiled, and the almost smile was the saddest thing in the room. For a while neither of them spoke, and the bound boy studied the man who had refused to kill him with an attention more searching than any he had ever turned on Harry before, because Harry had just done the one thing Tom Riddle had no framework to explain. "I don't understand you," Riddle said finally, and it was not a taunt. It was, for once, a simple statement of fact, offered with the bafflement of a master cartographer who has found a country missing from every map. "I have spent my whole life understanding people. It is the thing I am best at, better than the spell work, better than any of it. I look at a person and I see the levers, the fears, the wants, the place where they will break, and I am never wrong. I looked at you and saw a weapon pointed at me, and I was right. And then the weapon had me bound and beaten with every reason in the world and a clear shot, and it put itself away." His eyes searched Harry's face. "There is no lever that explains that. No fear, no want, no advantage. You gain nothing by my living. You risk everything. And you did it anyway, and you are not even pretending it was hard for you to decide. Tell me how. Tell me what I'm not seeing, because I cannot bear to be looking at a person and not see the whole of them. It has never happened to me before." "You're not seeing it because it isn't a lever," Harry said. "That's the whole answer, and you're going to hate it. I didn't spare you to gain anything. I spared you because killing a bound boy is a thing I'm not willing to become, and because I worked out with my wand at your chest that your death doesn't actually fix what I came to fix. Those aren't moves, Tom. They're just the shape of a person who decided, a long time ago, what he was and wasn't going to be. You keep looking for the lever because you think everyone has one, that under the manners and the talk every single person is finally just want and fear arranged into a person-shaped thing you can move. And most people you're right about, but not all. And the ones you're wrong about are the only ones worth a damn, and you've spent your whole life never letting one close enough to find out they exist." Riddle was silent, and his bound hands had gone still in his lap, and the expression on his face was the one Harry had glimpsed only twice before, in the library over a gifted book, in a dungeon after a dropped wand, the look of the starving boy behind the cold prince, staring out through a gap in the wall at something he had been told all his life was not real. "You're describing a kind of person I do not believe in," Riddle said very quietly. "I know," Harry said. "That's the saddest thing about you, and there's a lot of competition. You've met cruelty, and you've met fear, and you've met people who wanted to use you, and you've built a whole philosophy of the world out of the worst of it, and it's airtight and it's wrong, and the only thing that could ever prove it wrong is exactly the thing you won't let happen, someone getting close enough for long enough to show you that not everyone is what hurt you." He crouched down again, level with the bound boy, close enough that a free Riddle could have struck him, which was the entire point. "I'm going to be that someone. I decided it just now, with my wand at your heart and the whole war telling me to finish you. I'm not going to kill you, and I'm not going to leave you, and I'm not going to be afraid of you, and I'm going to keep doing it long after you've stopped looking for the trick, and one day, not soon, you're going to run out of ways to explain me, and on that day you'll finally understand the thing you've never believed. That's the plan, Tom, that's the whole of it. It's the most stubborn thing anyone has ever done to you, and you have no defense against it at all, and that's why it's going to work." "You're insane," Riddle whispered for the first time that night, and there was almost no conviction in it. "So I keep being told," Harry said, "by people who can't account for me. You're in good company." And he straightened and stood guard over the boy he had refused to slay, and waited because he knew the door was going to open, knew that Dumbledore had been watching, knew that the old man would have followed the cold the way Harry had, knew that he was not, after tonight, going to have to carry the next part alone. And the waiting, for the first time since the green light, did not feel like the weight of the whole world resting only on him. The door of the room of hidden things opened, which it was not supposed to do while the room was in use, and Albus Dumbledore stepped through into the wreckage, and the temperature of the entire situation changed. He took it in at a glance, the way he took in everything, the bound boy, the disarmed wand among the ruins, the splintered towers, the second boy standing over the first with a lowered wand and a face like a man who had just set down an impossible weight. And Harry understood, seeing him, that Dumbledore had been watching after all, that the conversation in the cinnamon worm office had landed, that the old man had kept his promise and watched the right boy with the right suspicion, and had followed the cold down into the castle's hidden places exactly as Harry had, and had arrived in time to see the end of the duel and to understand, from the single fact of a bound and living Tom Riddle, more than any explanation could have told him. "Well," Dumbledore said softly, and his blue eyes moved from Riddle's bound and furious face to Harry's exhausted one. "I did remember that you told me first, Mr. Black, as you asked. I have been remembering it for some weeks now, every time the castle went cold." He stepped further into the room, and his presence filled it the way it always did, and Riddle, Harry saw it, went very still under the old man's gaze, because whatever Tom Riddle thought of his teachers, some animal part of him knew precisely how dangerous this particular one was. I followed a Hufflepuff boy to the hospital wing 3 nights ago with no memory of how he came to be so frightened, and a faint, expert fog over the place where the memory should be. Your work, I think, Mr. Black, the fog was kind, which told me who had cast it, and tonight I followed the cold. And here I find the 2 strangest students I have ever taught, one of them bound in a room full of ruin, and I find I am no longer able to pretend I do not understand what I am looking at. Professor, Riddle began, and his voice slid instantly into the warm, reasonable register he used on adults, the prefect's voice, the favorite's voice. This is not what— Be quiet, Tom. Dumbledore did not raise his voice, and the warmth in Riddle's froze solid. I have listened to that voice for 5 years and admired the craft of it and let it persuade me, against my own better judgment, that there was nothing beneath it that I needed to fear. I am done being persuaded. I have seen a soul-binding diagram in a chamber behind the potion stores. Yes, I found it. The chalk does not lie even when the boy does, and I know what it was for. And I know there's only one person in this castle with the genius and the emptiness to attempt it. So you will be quiet, and you will let the adults speak, and you will understand that the long, charming performance is over. The old man's gaze swung to Harry and softened and held a question. And you, Harry? You have him bound, and you have not killed him, and I find I am very glad of it and very curious as to why. You came here to stop him. By your own account, you have the means in your hand. Why is he still breathing? Harry looked at Dumbledore, the younger, prouder, not yet broken Dumbledore who would one day be the closest thing to father he had, and made the last decision of the night, which was to tell this man, finally, enough of the truth to make him an ally in the thing that came next. Because killing him doesn't work, Professor, Harry said. I came a very long way to do it, and I had him at the end of my wand, and I worked out at the last second that it's the wrong move. He's not the problem, he's what the problem produces. If you want to stop what he becomes, and I promise you, you do more than you can imagine, you don't kill the boy. You unmake the road, and I think I finally know how. But I can't do it alone, and you're the only person alive who could help me, and so I'm going to ask you to trust a boy you can't explain, one more time, the way you've been trying not to your whole life. He held the blue gaze. I told you there was something in your school you came to stop. This is it. This is the night it gets stopped, or it never does. Will you help me? Dumbledore looked at him for a long, long moment, in the wreckage and the dim enchanted light, with the bound boy who would be Voldemort silent and watchful between them. And Harry watched the old wizard weigh the whole impossible thing, the transfer who knew too much, the warning that had come true, the soul binding in the cellar, the request to trust where trust had once cost the world a sister, and come, at last, with the gravity of a man stepping off a ledge, to decision. Tell me the move, Albus Dumbledore said, and God help us both if you're wrong. They moved Riddle to a place Dumbledore knew, a warded chamber off the Transfiguration corridor that the boy could not curse his way out of and could not charm his way past, and they left him bound and watched, and they went somewhere they could speak, and Harry told Dumbledore the move. There are 2 halves to it, Harry said. They were in the office again, the cinnamon and the dozing phoenix and the tank of half-transfigured newts, and it felt like a year since the first time, though it had been months. The first half is the soul. He's already tried to split it once and I stopped him, and the splitting half happened. You saw the diagram, you heard. The binding snapped back into him before it took. His soul is whole, Professor. Cracked, strained, half-torn and slammed shut again, but whole. There's still one undivided soul in that boy, which means there's still— Harry made himself say it because it was the hinge of everything— there's still a person in there, buried under 16 years of fortress, but whole. A torn soul can't be healed. A whole one that's never been torn still can. That's the first half. We have to make sure it never tears. Which means destroying the means, the diary, the diagram, every book and every road that leads to the splitting, and we have to do it tonight while he's bound, because the moment he's free he'll start again, and the next time I might not be there to break the chalk. And the second half, Dumbledore said quietly. The second half is harder, and it's the part I need you for, and it's the part I couldn't see until tonight. Harry leaned forward. Killing the boy doesn't work because the boy isn't the disease. The disease is the making, the orphanage, the fear, the certainty he learned before he could read that the only safe power is the power to make people afraid. You can't fix that with a wand, but you might be able to fix it with a life. He's 16, he has a soul. He has, somewhere under all that ice, a hunger that he's spent his whole life trying to fill with power because no one ever offered him anything else to fill it with. We took away his road to immortality tonight. If we leave it there, he just finds another road, because the hunger's still there and the fortress is still there, and nothing's changed except his timeline. But if someone he can't frighten, can't read, can't use, someone strong enough that his whole fear architecture is useless against them, if someone stays and keeps offering him the other thing, the thing he's never had year after year, refusing to leave, refusing to be afraid, refusing to want anything from him— Harry stopped because his voice had thickened and he made it steady again. Then maybe the fortress comes down, not tonight, not this year, but over a life. Because the only thing that ever unmakes a person who is taught the world is cruel is a long, stubborn, unkillable demonstration that it isn't. And I'm the only person alive equipped to give him that because I'm the only one he can't get past. That's the move, Professor, not his death. His raising, done over properly by someone who knows exactly what's at stake and refuses to flinch from it." The office was silent. The phoenix lifted its head and regarded them both with an ancient golden eye. "You are proposing," Dumbledore said slowly, "to spend years of your life, your singular, irreplaceable, impossible life, playing the part of family to the boy who murdered yours, to stay beside him, to love him in the deliberate, stubborn, demonstrative way one loves a child who does not believe love is real until he believes it, on the chance, not the certainty, the chance that it turns him." The blue eyes were very bright. "Do you have any idea how rare it is, Harry, for a person to propose such a thing? Most men who had Tom Riddle bound and helpless would have done the easy and terrible thing and called it justice. You are proposing the hard and terrible thing and calling it, what, winning right," Harry said. "I told you, I didn't come back to trade one murder for another. I came back to break the war at the root, and the root isn't a boy I can kill. It's a wound I can either deepen by killing him or try slowly against the odds to heal. I'd rather try and fail than win the cheap way. I've seen what the cheap way makes of people. It makes them him." Dumbledore rose and went to the window and stood looking out at the dark grounds for a long while, and when he turned back his face had the gravity of a man who has decided to bet the rest of his life on another man's judgment. "Then here is what we shall do," he said. "Night, you and I will destroy every means by which that boy might split his soul, the diary, the diagram, the books, the road to Little Hangleton if I have to seal the place myself. We will make the splitting impossible so that whatever he becomes it with a whole soul and a mortal life, which is to say with the capacity to still be reached and the certainty that he can still be stopped if reaching fails. That is the first half, and it is mine to help you with, and we will not sleep until it is done." He drew a breath, "And the second half, the long half, the raising, the years, that is yours, and I cannot do it for you, and I will not pretend it is anything other than the heaviest thing I have ever heard one person volunteer to carry, but I will help you carry it. I will keep him at this school under my eye and yours. I will give you both the years. And when I am gone, and Harry, something tells me you know better than I do how and when that will be, I will leave behind the instruction that the strange American who came from nowhere is to be trusted in the matter of Tom Riddle above any other living soul." He crossed the room and put both hands on Harry's shoulders, and the kindness in his face was almost unbearable. "I have spent my life looking for someone wise enough and strong enough and good enough to be trusted with the most dangerous things. I begin to suspect I have been waiting for you, whoever you are, wherever you have come from." Harry could not answer that, so he didn't, and the two of them stood for a moment in the cinnamon-warm office with the weight of the thing settling onto both of them, and then they went to work. They worked through the whole of that night and into the gray dawn, and it was the strangest labor of Harry's life to systematically dismantle, with the help of the greatest wizard of the age, every door that led to Lord Voldemort. They took the diary, blank and ordinary and never to become anything else now, and Dumbledore unmade it with a fire that was not quite fiend-fire and not quite anything Harry had a name for, a controlled white blaze that ate the book and the latent horror in it down to nothing. They destroyed the chalk diagram behind the potion stores and salted the chamber against its return. They gathered from the restricted section and from Riddle's own hidden caches that Harry knew how to find, every forbidden text on soul magic and birthright and the splitting of the self, and they burned them, and Dumbledore set wards on the empty shelves that would warn him if such knowledge ever tried to enter the castle again. And near dawn the old wizard went alone to seal a hovel in Little Hangleton against the boy who would otherwise have gone there in the summer to murder his way into immortality, to make the gaunt inheritance unreachable, the ring beyond finding, the road simply gone. By the time the sun came up over the lake, it was done. The means were destroyed. The Horcruxes that the histories remembered, the diary, the ring, the locket and cup and diadem and snake, the whole monstrous architecture of an immortality bought with murder, none of them would ever be made now, because the knowledge and the will and the road had all been taken away in a single night by the one man who knew they were coming and the one wizard powerful enough to help him. Lord Voldemort, in every form the future had ever held, had just been rendered impossible, not by a death, by an unmaking, and Tom Riddle, 16 years old, sat bound in a warded room with a whole and undivided soul and a mortal life ahead of him, and no road left to the darkness he had been walking toward, and somewhere in him behind the fortress, the hunger still burned, unfed and unfilled, waiting to see what the strange, unkillable American would do with it now that every other door had closed. Before the sun was fully up, Harry went to the warded room because he could not help it, because he had to see with his own eyes the thing he had made. Riddle was awake. Of course he was awake. Harry doubted the boy had slept at all. He sat against the far wall with his bound hands in his lap and his composure rebuilt, perfect and terrible, but his eyes when they found Harry in the doorway were not perfect. They were the eyes of someone who had spent a night doing arithmetic and had not liked the sum. "You've been burning things," Riddle said. "It was not a question. I can feel it. The way you can feel a tooth has been pulled even after the pain stops. There's a shape missing. The diary, the diagram, the books." His voice was very level. You've taken the road away, all of it, haven't you? While I sat here, you and the old man went through the castle and pulled out every door I'd found, and you burned them, and now there's nothing, no splitting, no anchoring. No, his jaw tightened, the only crack in the surface, no way back from dying. You've made me mortal, black, after I'd spent a year making myself the opposite. You've put it all back. Yes, Harry said, I should hate you for it. Riddle considered this with an awful detachment, as though examining the emotion from the outside. I find I do, more than I have ever hated anything. You have taken the one thing I wanted, the only thing, the thing under all the other things, and you have not even had the decency to kill me afterward. You've left me alive and ordinary and mortal in a school with a future like everyone else. Do you understand what you've done? You haven't beaten me. You've made me small. The hatred in his voice was matched underneath by something that frightened Harry more, a thin note of pure desolation. I would rather you had killed me. At least death at your hands would have meant I was worth crossing time to destroy. This is worse. This is being told I was never going to be anything worth the journey at all. And Harry understood, hearing it, the true shape of the cruelty the world had done to this boy, because he was watching it operate in real time. Tom Riddle could not conceive of a value to his own existence that was not greatness, could not imagine that a mortal, ordinary life might be worth living, because no one had ever once shown him that an ordinary person was worth anything, least of all himself. Strip away the dream of being a god, and there was nothing underneath but a terrified orphan who believed, all the way to the floor of himself, that if he was not extraordinary, he was nothing. Harry had not just burned the books, he had burned the only self-image the boy had ever been able to bear. You're wrong about why I came, Harry said, and crouched down so they were at a level, close enough that a free man could have killed him, which was the point. I keep telling you that, and you keep not hearing it. I didn't cross 50 years because you become great. I crossed it because you become a horror, and the horror eats everyone I love, and I came back to stop the horror. But somewhere in the middle of stopping it, Tom, I started to see the boy underneath, and the boy is not the horror. The boy is just somebody nobody ever stayed for. And I'm not going to kill that boy, and I'm not going to leave him, and I'm not going to be afraid of him, no matter how hard he tries to make me, and he's going to spend a long time hating me for it, because being stayed for is the one thing he has no defense against. Don't, Riddle said, and for the first time his voice was not level. Don't do that, don't be kind to me right now, hate me, fear me, want something from me, I know what to do with those. Do not sit there and tell me you're going to stay. His bound hands had curled into fists. Everyone leaves, that is the one reliable law of the world. My mother died rather than stay. The matrons counted the days. Every person I have ever, he stopped himself ruthlessly, but Harry had heard the catch. Every person learns what I am and goes. You will too. You'll do this noble thing for a month, a year, and then you'll see the bottom of me and you'll go like all of them, and I will have let myself. Again he stopped. The fortress was fighting to close and not quite managing. I will not be made a fool of by hope. I did that once, I will not do it again. So kill me or hate me, but do not promise to stay, because I will not survive watching you break it. It was the most naked thing Tom Riddle had ever said, and probably ever would, and it was a confession and a plea disguised as a threat. And Harry, who had buried everyone this boy would one day murder, knelt in the gray dawn light and felt his own heart break clean in two over the child his enemy had been before the world made him a monster. I'm not going to promise, Harry said quietly. You're right, a promise is just words, and you've been lied to with words your whole life. So I'm not going to promise to stay, I'm just going to stay. And you're going to keep waiting for me to leave, and I'm not going to, and the waiting is going to last years, and one day, not soon, I know better than to think soon, one day you're going to notice that the thing you've been braced against your whole life didn't happen. That's the only thing that's ever unmade a fortress like yours, Tom. Not an argument, not a curse. Just somebody refusing, day after day after day, to be the proof that you were right about the world. He stood. I become the most stubborn fact of your life, and we'll see at the end of it which of us was right about what's underneath. Riddle stared up at him, bound and beaten and unmade, and his face was a war between the fortress and the thing behind it that Harry had glimpsed once through a slot in a door, and neither side won it in that moment, and Harry had not expected either to. The work would take years, he had said so, he had meant it. You're insane, Riddle whispered for the second time that night, and it had even less conviction than before. Probably, Harry agreed. But I'm the stubbornest insane person you will ever meet, and I have nowhere else in the entire history of the world to be. Get some sleep, Tom, you're going to need it. Tomorrow we start over, and we do it right this time, and neither of us is going anywhere. He left and sealed the door behind him, and stood for a moment in the cold corridor with his back against the stone and his eyes shut, gathering himself, because the scene had cost him more than the duel had. Then he straightened and put it away the way he put everything away, and went to find Dumbledore. Harry stood at the window of the Transfiguration office and watched the sun come up, exhausted past anything, and understood that the war he had died in was over, not won in a single curse, but unmade at the root, dissolved before it could form. And he understood, too, that the harder thing was only just beginning, because tomorrow he would walk into that warded room and sit down across from the boy who would not be Voldemort, and begin the long, stubborn, year-on-year work of proving to him that the world had something to offer besides its teeth, and that this work, not the duel, not the burning of the diary, was the real reason he had been thrown 50 years back through time and his own death to land exactly here. He had set the irreversible move. There was no taking it back now for any of them. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Voldemort stopped before he was born. The thing that came for them came in the dead hour before the second dawn, and Harry felt it the way he had felt the green light fold the world, not as cold this time, but as wrongness, a pressure behind reality, as though something on the far side of the air were pushing to get in. He was in the Transfiguration office with Dumbledore, the two of them too wired to sleep after the night's burning, when the Phoenix woke screaming. It came off its perch in a blaze and beat at the window, and Harry was on his feet with the U-wand out before he understood why. And then he did understand, because he had felt this exact pressure once before on the floor of a great hall 50 years away, in the half-second when a curse meant for someone else had struck the splinter of soul behind his ribs and thrown him backward through time. "It's the fragment," Harry said, and his own voice sounded strange to him. "The piece of him that came back with me, I never asked where it went." Because he had been thrown here following that splinter, the unanchored shard of Voldemort's soul, struck loose by the killing curse and spooled home to the year in the place of its first making, and he had spent 6 months so consumed with the living boy that he had forgotten the dead thing that had carried him here, the 70 years future ghost of a soul that had nowhere in this timeline to belong. It had been waiting, it had been gathering. And now, with the diary burned and the diagram salted and every road to Voldemort closed, with the living Tom Riddle made whole and mortal and unable to become the thing the splinter remembered being, now the splinter understood that it was being erased, that the future it came from was unmaking itself around it, and it did the only thing a fragment of Lord Voldemort had ever done in the face of annihilation. It refused to die. The window did not break so much as the world behind it did. The glass became a depth, and out of the depth poured something that had no proper shape and insisted on several smoke and a face and a coiled absence, a darkness with the suggestion of red where eyes should be, the half-formed memory of a man who had spent a lifetime making himself into a thing that could not end. It was Voldemort, and it was not because the Voldemort it remembered had never been born here. It was the pattern of him, the groove the timeline had been meant to run in, a future that had been deleted and could not accept the deletion, clawing its way back toward the only anchor that could let it exist, the living boy 2 corridors away, with his whole soul and his hungry, roadless heart. "It's going for Tom," Harry said and ran. He understood the geometry of it in a heartbeat, the way he understood all soul magic in the end, as a shape rather than a sentence. The fragment could not exist on its own, it needed a host, and there was only one host in all of creation it could ever take, the source it had been torn from, the soul it was a piece of, Tom Riddle. If it reached the boy, it would not possess him the way an ordinary spirit might, it would complete him. It would pour the whole future of Lord Voldemort into a 16-year-old who had spent a lifetime wanting exactly that, and the boy who had been made mortal and whole the night before would become, in a single terrible communion, the very thing Harry had crossed time to prevent, would be handed by the ghost of his own future, the immortality and the power and the catalogue of 100 murders, all at once free, no road required. The fragment was the last road. The only one Harry had not been able to burn, because you cannot burn a thing that is already on its way through the wall of the world. Harry hit the warded door at a dead run and tore it open, and the thing was already there. It had come through the stone the way it had come through the glass, and it filled the small room with its impossible half-shape, and Tom Riddle stood pressed against the far wall with his bound hands and his fortress face finally, utterly broken open, staring at the wraith of what he was meant to become. And the thing was speaking to him in a voice like the inside of a tomb, a voice Harry had heard in a graveyard and prayed never to hear again, and it was offering the boy the oldest temptation in the world dressed in the boy's own future. "I am you, the fragment breath reaching. I am what you become, what they took from you, the greatness the interloper burned. Let me in and you lose nothing and gain everything. No more roads, no more waiting, no more being small. Only open and be what you were always going to be and live forever." And Tom Riddle, 16 years old, mortal, unmade, with the one thing he had wanted his whole life floating before him, offering itself for free, Tom Riddle looked at the wraith of Lord Voldemort, and then he looked past it, at Harry standing in the broken doorway with his wand up and his face white, and the boy's expression in that instant was the most naked Harry had ever seen it, and it was a question. "You said you would stay. Were you telling the truth?" "Don't," Harry said, not a command this time, a plea raw, the war-flat voice gone entirely. "Tom, look at it, really look at it. That's not your greatness, that's your grave. That's the thing you become, and look at it, it has no face, it has no soul left to have a face with. It tore itself into so many pieces chasing forever that there's nothing left but appetite and smoke. That's not living forever, that's dying forever, slowly starting now. I've seen the end of that road." I watched it die screaming in a hall full of people it murdered, killed by a boy with a borrowed wand, alone, hated, and empty. Tom, emptier than you have ever been on your worst night in that orphanage. His voice cracked and he let it. I burned every road to it because I wanted to give you the chance to be something else. This is the last road, and it came on its own, and I can't burn it for you. You have to refuse it. I can't make you. That's the whole horror and the whole point. For once in your life, somebody has to want the good thing for you and then step back and let you choose it. So I'm telling you the truth, the way I promised. I stayed, I'm staying. And the thing in front of you is not a gift. It's the proof of everything I've been trying to save you from. Choose, Tom. I'll be here either way. But for the love of everything, choose right. The wraith of Voldemort turned its half-formed face toward Harry, and the red suggestion of its eyes burned, and it understood at last that the interloper from the future was the thing standing between it and its own existence. And it stopped reaching for the boy and reached instead for Harry, and the room filled with a cold that was the cold of the space between the stars, and the geometry of the air bent wrong, and Harry braced to fight a thing that no living wizard had ever fought. The disembodied future of the darkest soul the world had made, and then a voice he had never expected said the word that changed everything. "No," said Tom Riddle. The wraith froze. "No," the boy said again, louder, and he had pushed himself off the wall, and his bound hands were straining at the ropes, and his face was terrible and alive and deciding, the fortress not rebuilt, but for the first time in his life consciously, deliberately set down. "I have spent my whole life being told what I am by things that wanted to use me. The orphanage, the fear, you." He stared at the wraith of his own future. "And him," a jerk of the head at Harry, "he's the first one who ever told me what I am and then left the choosing to me. He could have killed me, he could have made me, he did neither. He burned every road and then knelt in the dark and told me he'd stay, and he had no reason to, none. I murdered everyone he loved in a world that hasn't happened, and he stayed anyway." The boy's voice shook with something Harry had never heard in it, something that might in a person who had been allowed to feel things have been the beginning of grief. "You're offering me forever." He offered me a chance, and I have just enough left of a soul to know the difference. So no, I won't open, I won't become you. I would rather be small and mortal and mine than be you forever. For a moment the word hung in the room and nothing answered it, and Harry understood that he was watching something that had never happened in the history of the world and might never happen again. A soul offered its own completion, its own immortality, its own deferred greatness, turning the gift away with open eyes. The boy had not been tricked into refusing. He had not been too weak to accept. He had understood exactly what was held out to him, in all its terrible glory, and he had waited against a man's stubborn refusal to leave, and he had chosen the smaller, harder, mortal thing. It was the single freest act Harry had ever witnessed, and it bent the whole geometry of the room around it. The wraith felt the change and could not abide it. It had been reaching for the boy with the awful patience of a thing that owns all of time, and now it recoiled as though the air around Tom had turned to fire, because a fragment of soul cannot take by force a vessel that refuses it. The whole horror of the magic was that it required the splitting to be willed and the completing to be wanted, and Tom Riddle had just stopped wanting it, all the way down, and in that instant the last road to Lord Voldemort closed from the inside. Sealed by the one hand that had ever held the only key. The temperature of the room fell past cold into the absolute zero of the space between dying stars, and the half-formed thing turned from the boy who had shut the door against it forever, and began in a final blind fury to seek the one target left to it, the interloper from the future, the cause of its unmaking, the man standing in the broken doorway who had reached back across 50 years to make sure it was never born. The wraith screamed, and the scream was the sound of a future losing its grip on the world, because the fragment could not exist without an anchor, and the only anchor it could ever have had just refused it. The source soul had looked at the piece torn from it and chosen not to take it back, chosen wholeness over the completion the wraith offered, and a piece of soul rejected by its own origin has nowhere in all of creation to be. The thing that had been Lord Voldemort began to come apart, the smoke and the half-face and the coiled absence unraveling, and it made one last lunge, not at Tom now, who had closed the door against it forever, but at Harry, the interloper, the cause, in a final blind fury to take someone down with it into the unmaking. Harry was ready. He had been ready, in a sense, since the night he stepped in front of a green light for someone he loved, because he had learned the one piece of magic that the darkest soul in the world had never been able to learn and never would, and it was not in any book Riddle had burned to find. He did not fight the wraith with force. He had tried force against Voldemort his whole first life, and it had never been enough. He met the fragment instead with the thing it had been fleeing since the moment it was first torn loose. He met it with willing surrender, the same surrender he had carried into a forest once and into a curse once more, the deliberate, unafraid, complete acceptance of his own mortality that was the exact opposite of everything the fragment was. He lowered his wand. He opened his hands. And as the wraith of Voldemort poured toward him in its dying rage, Harry did the most powerful thing he had ever done, which was nothing at all. He stood still and unafraid and let it come, and offered it in the place where it expected to find terror only a vast and final peace. The fragment struck that peace the way a wave strikes a cliff and broke on it. It could not abide what it found. A thing made entirely of the refusal to die cannot survive contact with a soul that has made its peace with dying. The two were antimatter to each other, and where they met, the fragment simply ceased, unmade not by a curse but by its own nature meeting the one nature it could never overcome. There was a sound like the universe exhaling. The cold of the space between stars rushed out of the room all at once. The geometry of the air snapped back into its proper shape. And the wraith of Lord Voldemort, the last surviving piece of the future that should have been, the final road to the Dark Lord, the pattern that had clawed its way back through deletion to insist on existing, came apart into nothing at all, scattered, gone, erased so completely that it left not even a memory of itself anywhere in any time. It was over, truly over now. Not the boy unmade, but the making unmade. The whole architecture of Voldemort dissolved at its absolute root, the knowledge burned, the road sealed, the soul left whole, and now the very ghost of the future destroyed by the two things it could never defeat, a boy's free choice and a man's willingness to die in peace. Silence filled the small, warded room. The phoenix, somewhere far off, had stopped screaming and begun instead to sing. Harry lowered himself to the floor because his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him, and across the room Tom Riddle slid down the wall to sit among the scattered ropes that had fallen from his wrists when the wraith died, and the two of them sat in the wreckage in the birdsong and looked at each other, the boy who would not be Voldemort and the man who had made sure of it, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing left in the world that needed saying. "You stayed," Tom said finally, wonderingly, as though testing whether it was still true now that the danger had passed. "I stayed," Harry agreed. "You'll leave eventually." But there was no certainty in it anymore, only the old reflex, already weaker. "Everyone, maybe," Harry said. "I'm mortal too, Tom, we both are now. One day one of us goes first. That's the deal we both just chose over the other thing, but not today and not this year, and when I go it won't be because I left. It'll be because that's what it is to be a person, and you're a person now, all the way, whole soul, an immortal life and a future you get to actually build instead of steal." He managed something like a smile. "Welcome to it. It's harder than being a god. It's worth more." Tom Riddle looked at his own unbound hands, turning them over as though seeing them for the first time, and on his face was an expression Harry had never witnessed there in 6 months of watching, an expression the histories would never have believed possible, because it was the look of a boy at the very beginning of learning that he might be allowed to be something other than what the world had made him. "I don't know how to do that," Tom said quietly. "Be a person. I never learned. I only ever learned how to be feared." "I know," Harry said. "That's all right, I'm going to teach you. It's going to take years, and you're going to hate most of them, and it's the most important thing I will ever do, and I have, as I believe I mentioned, absolutely nowhere else in the entire history of the world to be." He got to his feet and crossed the room and held out his hand to the boy who would have been the murderer of everyone he loved. "Come on, the sun's coming up. Let's go find Dumbledore and tell him the war's over before it started." And Tom Riddle looked at the offered hand for a long moment, the oldest test in the world, the simplest, the one the wraith and the orphanage and 16 years of fear had all insisted he would never be offered without a hook, and then he took it and let Harry pull him up, and the two of them walked out of the warded room together into the light of a morning that, somewhere far down the long corridor of years, had just quietly rewritten itself. Dumbledore was waiting for them in the corridor because of course he was. He had felt the wrongness too, and the phoenix had flown to him, and he had come as fast as an old man could come and arrived to find the danger already past, and the two strangest students he had ever taught walking out of a warded room side by side, alive, unbound, the cold gone out of the air between them. He stopped. He looked at them for a long moment, at Harry's exhausted face and Tom's unguarded one, at the absence of any wand raised between them, at the simple, impossible fact of the two of them standing together in the dawn as something other than enemies. And whatever Albus Dumbledore had braced himself to find, it had not been this, and his face moved through several things before it settled at last into a wonder that was almost reverence. "It is gone," he said softly. It was not quite a question. "The thing I felt come through the world an hour ago. I have no word for it, Harry. I have studied a great deal, and I have no word for what pressed against the castle tonight. It is gone." "It's gone," Harry confirmed. It was the last of him, the future trying to put itself back. It came for Tom to finish what I'd stopped, and Tom, he glanced at the boy beside him, and something passed between them that Dumbledore watched and did not interrupt. Tom told it no. With everything it was offering him held out in its hands, he told it no. And then it came for me, and it broke on the one thing it could never get past, and it's gone, all of it. There's no road left to what he would have become. Not the books, not the splitting, not the inheritance, not even the ghost of it. It's finished, Professor. The war's over. It happened tonight in a room before any of it ever started, and almost no one will ever know it was even a possibility. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was not steady, which Harry had never heard before and would never hear again. I have spent my whole life, the old wizard said, preparing to fight a darkness I could feel coming the way one feels a storm below the horizon. I did not know its name. I did not know its shape. I only knew with the certainty I have learned to trust that something terrible was gathering, and that I would one day have to meet it, and that meeting it might cost me everything I had left to give. He looked at Tom, really looked, at the boy he had suspected and watched and braced against for 5 years, and the suspicion in his eyes had been replaced by something Harry suspected the boy had never received from an adult in his life: a clean, unguarded, unconditional welcome. And here you are, the two of you, telling me that the storm has been turned aside in a single night, by a boy from nowhere who refused to take the easy victory, and a boy from this very castle who refused to become the thing the whole world was certain he already was. I am an old man, and I have seen a great deal of the worst that people can do. I had begun to forget that I might still be surprised by the best of it. He drew a breath that shook. Thank you, both of you, for the thing you have just done that no one will ever thank you for, because no one will ever know it needed doing. That's rather the point of it, Professor, Tom said, and it was the first thing Harry had ever heard him say that contained no calculation at all, just a dry, tentative, almost shy attempt at the kind of remark a person makes when they are trying, for the first time, to simply be among other people rather than above them. Dumbledore laughed, surprised, delighted, and the sound of it filled the cold corridor with something warm, and Harry watched Tom Riddle hear an adult laugh with him rather than at him or in fear of him, and saw the boy file the experience away with the wary astonishment of someone receiving a coin in a currency he had never been paid in before. There will be a great deal to arrange, Dumbledore said, gathering himself, the practical wizard reasserting over the moved one. Tom, you have a year and a half of school remaining, and I intend to see that you spend it learning the things you actually need, which are not on any examination. Harry, and here the old man's eyes came to rest on him with a weight that told Harry the wizard had understood more than had been said, you will stay, as long as you are able. I do not entirely understand what it will cost you to have done this, but I have watched your face this past hour, and I think you understand it very well, and I think the cost is large, and I think you mean to pay it without complaint, as you appear to pay everything. So I will say only this: whatever you have given up to stand in this corridor tonight, it was not wasted. I will carry the knowledge of what you did, even if I am the only one who ever does, for the rest of my life. Will be remembered, Harry Black, by me. That much at least I can promise, and I keep my promises. And Harry, who had made his peace with being forgotten by an entire world, found that the promise of one old man to remember him undid something in his chest that the wraith and the duel and the whole long war had not managed to touch, and he had to look away toward the window for a moment before he could trust his voice. That's more than enough, Professor, he said. That's more than I came expecting. I'll take it. They stood a moment longer, the three of them, in the gray-going gold light of the corridor, with the phoenix singing somewhere above and the castle waking around them and the whole terrible future quietly dissolving behind them into a thing that had never been. Then Dumbledore put a hand on each of their shoulders, the murdered man's killer that never was and the time-thrown man who had saved him, and turned them both gently toward the light. Come, he said. It is morning, and you have both been awake far too long, and the war is over, and I find I should very much like to sit down and have a cup of tea with the two people who ended it. Indulge an old man. It is not every day one outlives a storm one was certain would be the death of him. Harry felt the timeline change at the threshold, and it was the strangest sensation of his life. It did not hurt. He had half expected it to hurt, to feel himself unravel as the future that made him cease to need making, but it was gentler than that, and stranger, and entirely beautiful. He felt the world ahead of him shift its weight, the way a vast ship comes about, all the millions of small turnings of 50 years swinging onto a new heading at once. Somewhere down that corridor of years, a man and a woman who would have died in a cottage on a Halloween night were going to live instead, and grow old, and the boy they would have left behind an orphan was never going to be born to a war at all. Somewhere a great many names that had been carved into a memorial wall were never going to be carved. Somewhere a girl with wild hair and a wrecked arm and a mind like a blade was going to live a whole long life and never once know that the green light had ever come for her, because the boy who stepped in front of it had reached back through his own death and made sure the war that produced it never happened. They would not remember him. That was the price, and Harry had known it since the iron bed, and he found, standing in the dawn light with Tom Riddle's whole and ordinary life beside him, that he could pay it gladly. The future he had bought would have no Harry Potter in it, no boy who lived, because there would be no Dark Lord for him to survive, no scar, no prophecy, no war. Hermione would never meet him on a train, because there would be no reason for either of them to be fleeing toward the same school for the same broken reasons. The whole shape of the life he had lived and lost would simply never occur, and the people in it would live easier, lighter, unhaunted lives in its absence, and not one of them would ever know the name of the person who had given it to them. It was the most complete victory imaginable, and it was indistinguishable from the inside from being forgotten. And Harry Potter, Harry Black, the stubbornest insane person in any century, the man who had stepped in front of a curse and kept going, stood in the rewritten morning and accepted both halves of it at once, the triumph and the erasure, the way he had learned to accept everything, fully and without drama and without looking away. "You've gone somewhere," Tom observed, watching him with the new, careful attention of a boy just beginning to learn that other people had insides worth noticing. "Where did you go?" "Home," Harry said, "sort of. The home I came from just stopped needing to exist, because everyone in it's going to be all right now, better than all right. They're going to be ordinary, Tom, all of them, safe and ordinary and bored, and they'll never know how close it came, and that's exactly the way I want it." He looked out the high window at the sun coming up gold over the lake, the same lake, 50 years younger, in a world that had just chosen a different ending. That's what winning actually looks like in the end, not a parade, not anyone remembering, just a lot of people living quiet lives they don't know they almost didn't get. "I'd cross 50 years and die twice for that. I already have. I'd do it again tomorrow." The phoenix had come to rest on the windowsill, and it sang, and below them the castle was beginning to wake into the first morning of a century that would never produce a Lord Voldemort, would never carve the names, would never bury the people Harry loved. A long, bright corridor of ordinary years stretching away into a future that had just, against every odd, been handed back its innocence. Harry Black stood in the light of it, beside the boy he had saved instead of slain, and he was not the boy who lived anymore, and he never would be again, because in the world he had made there had never been anything for him to survive. He was only a man, mortal and whole and unremembered, who had been given the one thing no one in any war has ever given, the chance to start at the beginning, and had spent it, every last impossible second of it, on mercy. It was, he thought, watching the sun climb, the best thing he had ever done, and no one would ever know, and that was exactly, precisely, perfectly right. "Come on," he said again, and clapped the boy who would not be Voldemort on the shoulder, and the two of them walked out into the morning together, into the long, ordinary years, into the future Harry had died to give a world that would never know his name and would never need to. The years did exactly what Harry had promised they would do, which was to be hard. He had not lied to the boy in the warded room, and he did not lie to himself afterward. The raising of Tom Riddle was the longest and most exhausting campaign of either of his lives, harder than the war, harder than the year on the run, because a war has battles and a battle has an end, and this had neither. It had only the slow daily work of being, for a person who had never had one, the fixed and unleavable fact that someone had stayed. Riddle tested it the way Harry had known he would, coldly, ingeniously, for months, looking for the day Harry would tire of him and prove the old law of the world true after all. He was cruel when cruelty might drive Harry off. He was charming when charm might be used. He withdrew into silences that lasted weeks. He did everything a frightened creature does to make the thing it cannot believe in go away before it can hurt him by leaving on its own. And Harry did not go. That was the whole of his side of it, and it was enough, because it was the one move Tom Riddle had no answer to. Harry sat with him through the silences. He met the cruelty without flinching and without retreating and without ever returning it. He let the charm slide off because he could see the machinery behind it, and a magician is never fooled by his own trick performed back at him. Day after stubborn day, he was simply there, unkillable, unfrightened, wanting nothing, until somewhere in the long grind of it, Harry could never name the day, there was no single day, the testing began to slow, and then to stop, and a boy who had spent 16 years certain that everyone left looked up one ordinary afternoon, and found that the strangest fact of his life had become the most reliable one. It did not make Tom Riddle gentle. Harry had never expected it to, and would not have trusted it if it had. The man Tom became was still cold, still brilliant, still capable of a ruthlessness that could empty a room, but it was a ruthlessness with a floor under it now, a thing he chose and aimed rather than a thing that owned him, and the difference between those two was the difference between a surgeon and a butcher, between a statesman and a tyrant, between the man Tom Riddle grew into and the thing called Voldemort that in another world had grown into him. He left Hogwarts and did not vanish into the old forbidden places. He went into the ministry eventually, and was feared there in the ordinary way that capable people are feared, and did a great deal of cold, competent good, and married late and badly, and learned, slowly and imperfectly and with Harry's exasperated help, the alien art of letting a few people close. He never split his soul. He never had to. The hole he had spent his youth trying to fill with murder and permanence turned out to be fillable, barely, incompletely, the way all human holes are, not with godhood, but with the stubborn, ordinary fact of not being left. Dumbledore kept his promise too. He remembered. Through all the years that followed, the old wizard carried the knowledge of what had been turned aside in a single night, and he and Harry grew, in time, into something Harry had never expected and treasured beyond saying, not student and teacher, but two men who shared the heaviest secret in the world, and the quiet satisfaction of having spent it well. And when Albus Dumbledore died, full of years, in a world that had never needed him to fight a Dark Lord and so had let him simply grow old, Harry stood at the grave beside a graying Tom Riddle, and the two of them, the boy who would have been the murderer and the man who had refused to murder him, said goodbye to the one other person who had ever known what they were to each other. Harry himself lived a small life and was glad of it. He stayed Harry Black, the name had no thread to pull, and he had grown to like the man who wore it. He taught in the end defense at Hogwarts, because it turned out he could not stay away from the place, and could not stop wanting to put what he knew into the hands of children who would never have to use it the way he had. Septimus Weasley married his sharp-eyed Carisse and filled a crooked house with red-haired children, and Harry was at the wedding, and was an uncle of sorts to a great many people who would in another world have been his enemies and his family and his dead. None of them ever knew. That was the shape of the whole gift, and Harry had made his peace with it in an iron bed in 1943 and never once regretted the bargain, a world that did not remember him because it had never needed to be saved. He thought sometimes on quiet evenings about the other future, the one that had been unmade, the one with a lightning scar and a prophecy and a war and a green light meant for a girl with wild hair. He thought about Hermione, who in this world had been born to different parents in a different decade, and lived a whole bright ordinary life he would never see and never share, safe, unhaunted, never once knowing that a boy had stepped in front of a curse for her, and then crossed 50 years and his own death to make certain the curse was never cast. He had loved her enough to die for her twice. He had been rewarded with the certainty that she would never know his name. And he found, every time he turned it over, that he would make the trade again without a breath of hesitation, because that, a person you love living a long, quiet life that does not contain you, was not the consolation prize of victory. It was the prize itself. It was the only thing winning had ever really meant. On the last evening of his life, an old man now, Harry Black sat at a high window of a castle that had never once produced a Lord Voldemort, and watched the sun go down gold over a lake 50 years and a lifetime from where it had all begun, and felt the lattice of the world. The strange folded geometry he had glimpsed twice, in the instant of dying and in the instant of his enemy's unmaking, settled quietly around him one final time, not as a falling but as a homecoming. He had spent his death well. He had spent it on mercy, every impossible second of it, and a world full of people he loved was going to wake tomorrow into an ordinary morning. They did not know they had nearly been denied, and not one of them would ever know the name of the man who had given it to them. And that, Harry thought, watching the last of the light, was exactly, precisely, perfectly right. He closed his eyes. Somewhere far below, a phoenix that had outlived the wizard who raised it began, for no reason anyone living could have named, to sing, and the long, bright corridor of ordinary years stretched away unbroken into a future that would never carve the names, never dig the graves, never need a boy who lived, because the boy who would have lived had reached back through the dark and made certain there was nothing left for anyone to survive. Chapter 7 End.